Chapter 389. Li Tianlan was on the way. Di Jiang was also on the way. The time of the high-level meeting of the Zhongzhou Decision-Making Committee was never public, but it was never confidential. Therefore, almost every high-level meeting would attract a large number of domestic and foreign media attention. And it was just limited to attention. No media could step into the high-level meeting room. All they could do was vaguely grasp the direction of the general trend of Zhongzhou State from the venue of the meeting, the personnel adjustment after the meeting, and the content of the meeting notice. August 1st, Zhongzhou State decided to hold a high-level meeting in the building of the army headquarters instead of the Hidden Dragon Sea. In the case of heavy casualties in the garrison in Zhongzhou State responded immediately and held the meeting in the building of the army headquarters. It was to let the world see the strength and iron blood of this world's superpower. This was destined to be a high-level meeting of a standard no less than the Yuzhou Conference some time ago. Whether internally or externally. Externally, Zhongzhou State would formally show its attitude to the upheaval in Eastern Europe. Internally, Zhongzhou State, especially the military, would usher in a major personnel transfer. The final maneuver of the two academies was the fuse. The competition of several young people represented the wrestling of several large groups. Whether they won or lost, everything would change. The general trend of Zhongzhou State would also enter a new balance and starting point. As the second master of the Wang family of Beihai on the surface, Di Jiang was destined to be the most eye-catching role in this meeting. This time, he was specially invited to attend the high-level meeting. What about next time? Would he sit there above board? Di Jiang didn't think about this. He had always been a person who didn't like to fantasize. Anything that had not been finalized had the possibility of accidents for him. So he never had expectations for things that had not happened. Without expectations, his heart would be really calm. From his standpoint, he didn't need any far-sighted vision and pattern. He would rather focus on what was in front of him and control everything he could see. Di Jiang was watching the video. The pure black Rolls-Royce was getting closer and closer to the building of the army headquarters. On the laptop screen, the video of the team maneuver of the two academies was playing repeatedly. Di Jiang watched Li Tianlan walk into the woods. In the clear picture, he broke a branch in the mottled sun. At that moment, two figures appeared clearly on the screen. One was Li Tianlan, holding a branch. The other was completely blurred and almost transparent, but the general outline was exactly the same as Li Tianlan's. Two figures, left and right. An incredible exclamation could even be heard on the screen. Di Jiang watched quietly. His eyes were calm and focused. He saw a branch easily overwhelm Fan Haoyu of the thunder-shocking realm. He saw the Heaven Punishment Sword formation with Chen Moxue as the core. He saw the brilliant sword light that covered everything in the Heaven Punishment Sword formation. He saw the green leaf falling from the sword light. The green leaf distorted space with sword intent, turning into a transparent silhouette. The sword light sprinkled down. Li Tianlan disappeared. The green leaf that deceived everyone's perception became Li Tianlan's appearance. Chen Moxue was held in his hand. Wang Xianxia activated the Heaven Punishment Sword formation again. Besieged by three young chosen ones, Li Tianlan's night walking, and the punch that almost shattered the final hit sword formation. In the end, the mountains and rivers were silent forever. Light appeared in a dark and silent world. Wang Tianzong's palm blocked the fallen leaves one after another, and a drop of blood appeared in his palm. Di Jiang stared at the laptop in front of him. He had watched this video countless times. But every time I see it, I'm shocked. Di Jiang closed the laptop and said softly with emotion. This video was like a bizarre and fantasy movie. In everyone's eyes, it was a little ridiculous. Di Jiang was not shocked by Li Tianlan's combat capability. At least not just combat capability. To be exact, it should be the combination of this terrifying combat capability and Li Tianlan's age that caused such a terrifying shock. 22 years old, with the combat capability of the invincible realm. What do you think? Wang Tianzong glanced at Di Jiang's laptop and asked. Di Jiang didn't know what his master was asking about, so he asked directly, "What do you mean?" "Everything." Wang Tianzong's tone was concise. Jiang was silent for a long time. He felt a little bitter in his heart. He was not afraid of Li Tianlan in this state, but he was already 36 years old this year. The gap between age and strength was there. Even if he had watched the video many times, it was still hard for him to accept it. Incredible, Jiang said. Wang Tianzong nodded and didn't comment. His strength is not inferior to mine, and his speed is far better than mine. His martial arts sword intent seems to be very special. Master, I agree with your view. Dual wind and thunder veins are incredible, but he gives me a strange feeling. Jiang said slowly. He spoke very slowly and seemed extremely cautious. His current conditions are completely unique. But the strength he showed, if the video is his full strength, then I can be sure that he will not be a match for me now. Although the gap is small, I am stronger than him. He is full strength. Wang Tianzong said calmly, but where is his full strength? Jiang was stunned for a moment. He thought of the punch that Li Tianlan smashed the entire sword formation and all the elites, and the extremely quiet and empty sword. It's that piece of leaf. Wang Tianzong sighed softly. Jiang was silent. The full strength attack in his heart was Li Tianlan's eternal silence of mountains and rivers. That sword was absolutely terrifying, strange, empty, majestic, silent, but extremely real, obliterating everything. If Jiang didn't hold back, he could take this sword. Although he was destined to be seriously injured, Li Tianlan would definitely be more miserable than him. That piece of leaf? He couldn't see how strong it was. Although it was amazing, he distorted the space with sword intent and deceived everyone's vision and perception. In essence, it was not a doppelganger, but a sword intent. But in the eyes of outsiders, it was a doppelganger. Now in the whole dark world, only a few people who really stood at the peak of the invincible realm could master this kind of means. It was really amazing that Li Tianlan could master this, but the power of that sword intent was just so. Martial arts is the combination of strength and willpower. Our Wang family of Beihai cultivates swordsmanship. If sword energy is strength, then sword intent is equal to willpower. Wang Tianzong said. Jiang was silent, as if thinking. You mean, Jiang said with some uncertainty, the appearance of the doppelganger formed by sword intent consumed Li Tianlan's absolutely focused willpower, so that when his real body appeared, he didn't show the strongest strength? Will his real combat capability be more terrifying than in the video? Wang Tianzong thought about it and nodded. Jiang's eyes were a little frightened. He hasn't really entered the invincible realm. How is it possible? He may not be stronger than you, but he is definitely not weaker than you. Wang Tianzong said, you have to admit that his current conditions in all aspects are better than yours. The dual thunder veins are very domineering, but with the dual wind veins, you can maximize the advantages to the limit. Your strength is not much different, but in speed, he is faster than you. In terms of willpower, the invincible manual in the map of God of War of the Li family is originally to cultivate the mind. The Li family has been in a very bad situation in recent years, and Li Tianlan's experience is enough to make his willpower as firm as a rock. Desert experience, recultivation, and recultivation after 3 years in Heaven Capital is equivalent to nirvana. In terms of willpower, he also has no shortcomings. Wang Tianzong looked out of the window. In the distance, he could already see the majestic light of the army headquarters building under the morning sun. Now he has the most perfect body, the most perfect willpower. Realm? 3 years ago, he temporarily entered the invincible realm in Heaven Capital, destroyed all his own foundation, and stood at the top. At that time, his realm was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. Now he has the dragon vein, and his vision will be further broadened. Now his strength is not enough, but his vision is also far better than yours. Because he has personally experienced the power close to the peak of the invincible realm, he can deceive the perception of Xianxia and others with that sword intent. Jiang rolled his eyes and said painfully, if you say so, I am very desperate. According to what you mean, now Li Tianlan is perfect without any shortcomings? Wang Tianzong smiled. Jiang was looking forward to his rebuttal, But he didn't. Indeed. Now Li Tianlan really has no shortcomings. He continued without waiting for Dijiang to speak, but absolute perfection itself is a shortcoming when the level is not high. Dijiang's eyes lit up, and his whole person became serious. He was the first disciple of Wang Tianzong, and Sword Emperor spared no effort in teaching him. He spent no less effort on him than Wang Xingxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai. All the resources and inheritance of the Wang family of Beihai were open to him without reservation. Sword Emperor really treated him like a son. Dijiang knew why. Hundreds of years ago, after the Wang family of Beihai completely established itself in Mount Dibing and Beihai province, the Wang family of Beihai had a god of war. The first god of war of the Wang family of Beihai was the ancestor of the Lin clan. He was also the guardian god of war of Zhongzhou state, and he also established Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun. The idea of the Lin clan was lazy and undisciplined, and they didn't like to fight for power and profit. After the Lin clan moved to Switzerland, the position of god of war of Zhuanyuantai was passed on to the Li family. After that, it was another hundreds of years. The Li family was the god of war of Zhongzhou state, and also the god of war of the Wang family of Beihai. The two families were close. For hundreds of years, the Wang family of Beihai had at least two experts at the peak of the invincible realm in each generation. In this generation, it was Wang Tianzong and Summer Solstice. But in the previous generation, the generation before that, and many times before that, the two experts at the peak of the invincible realm in the Wang family of Beihai were actually the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and the god of war of the Wang family of Beihai. So in other words, before the collapse of the Li family, there were also two experts at the peak of the invincible realm in each generation of the Li family. They were the patriarchs of the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai. The two families had been really close for many years, and they didn't even distinguish one from the other. Now, after the Li family came back after the collapse and parted ways with the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Tianzong completely regarded Dijiang as the guardian god of war of the new generation of the Wang family of Beihai. Based on this alone, Dijiang didn't want to lose to Li Tianlan. He would rather give up everything than to disappoint his master and Beihai province. If Li Tianlan were at the peak of the invincible realm now, with all the conditions combined, he would indeed have no shortcomings. He would be perfect and powerful, and he could be called the chosen one. Wang Tianzong chuckled softly. But he's not now. Not to mention the peak of the invincible realm, he can only be said to have the combat capability of the invincible realm. The new martial arts, absolute strength and speed, perfect willpower, and extremely high vision are all combined with him. He doesn't have enough accumulation, but he bears so many perfections. At present, in addition to being powerful, his martial arts are only chaotic. You're right. He's really strange, but to put it bluntly, the so-called strangeness is that he can't make full use of his current perfect resources. Dijiang listened quietly and thought silently. After a while, he took a serious look at Wang Tianzong and said, "Master, please enlighten me. There's no problem with him in itself. There's no problem in any aspect. But the so-called perfection also needs to be compared. His physical strength is originally flawless, but with the equally perfect dual wind and thunder veins, there's a problem. Now it's difficult for his physical strength to completely support the strength of the dual wind and thunder veins. I don't know what he experienced to have the present physique, but if the dual wind and thunder veins didn't appear, he should have really entered the invincible realm now. The dual wind and thunder veins put a burden on his body. While giving him more potential, it also suppressed his realm. As for his willpower, it's naturally flawless. So he will also become absolutely focused in the state of battle, but absolute focus means faster consumption. If the willpower is consumed too fast, it's easy to relax in the case of absolute focus. If there's a flaw in the willpower, his strength, speed, and sword intent will all be affected. This is chaos. Li Tianlan is very strong now, but his shortcomings are also very obvious. If he wants to exert his strength, it's hard for his speed and sword energy to keep up. If he wants sword intent, his strength is slightly insufficient. If he pursues speed, his strength and sword intent will drag him down. If he wants to exert his full strength, The consumption of his mind and willpower can't keep up. He should have realized something. Otherwise, why did he use the green leaf in the maneuver? His real body is enough to sweep this maneuver. Obviously, he's honing himself. Dijiang didn't speak for a long time. Only then did he understand that if his level was not high enough and he was too perfect, it would become such a huge trouble. His thoughts became a little subtle. Can it be solved? It's difficult. And it's too early to say these things. Wang Tianzong shook his head. Dijiang was watching the video, and he was not idle either. From the end of the maneuver to the present, he had watched the video many times more than Dijiang. Standing at the realm that was half a step higher than the peak of the invincible realm, he could naturally find Li Tianlan's problem after watching it so many times. He should have realized something now. But I guess he just feels that something is wrong. If I'm right, Li Tianlan should just realize that it's hard for his willpower to drive the strength and speed of the dual wind and thunder veins. In other words, he now feels that his body is extremely perfect, but his willpower is problematic. Yuetong often calls him in Mount Dibbing, but he rarely receives it. That guy should be resting, using a long rest to slowly cultivate his spirit. Is this wrong? Dijiang wondered. Yes and no. Wang Tianzong shook his head. As I said, there's nothing wrong with him in all aspects. But there are problems everywhere when combined. When he realizes what's going on, it's not easy to perfect it. Most importantly, he's missing the most important thing. Dijiang raised his eyebrows. What? Time. Wang Tianzong said calmly, he doesn't have time to perfect these. Li Tianlan needed time to perfect his body, but the information left by Qin Weibai could only buy him half a year at most. In half a year, Li Tianlan might not even realize what was wrong with him, let alone perfect anything. After Wang Tianzong solved the hidden danger inside the Wang family of Beihai, how could Li Tianlan live? It will take him a long time. Dijiang hesitated and said softly. Wang Tianzong glanced at him and nodded. How cruel is it? Dijiang looked at Wang Tianzong's eyes. It's best to be safe. Wang Tianzong's tone left no room for negotiation. Dijiang smiled bitterly and shook his head. The cruelty he said was not to Li Tianlan. It was to himself and to Wang Xianxia. Li Tianlan's road was destined to have a lot of troubles. He had his own martial arts and the perfect conditions. Normally, he should enter the invincible realm soon. But the perfect conditions made his body completely unbalanced. It was destined to take a long time to perfect his body. There was no hope for at least 3 to 5 years. This time should be the time when Dijiang broke through to the invincible realm, and also the time for Wang Xianxia to catch up with or even surpass Li Tianlan. But Wang Tianzong didn't want to give Li Tianlan any chance. It was also cruel for Wang Xianxia, who only wanted to defeat Li Tianlan. But Wang Tianzong said it was best to be safe. In fact, there was one more thing Wang Tianzong didn't say. The invincible realm was different from the 4 realms of martial arts. There was very little room for improvement. If the 4 realms of martial arts represented a person's potential, then the invincible realm was almost equivalent to the limit of a person's potential. Therefore, the invincible realm was also divided into the strong and the weak, the divine and holy lists. As far as Dijiang's aptitude was concerned, his accumulation was rich enough. At the moment when he broke through to the invincible realm, if his potential was fully released, his combat capability would directly soar to the divine list. After stabilizing his realm, he would go one step further and finally retain countless possibilities to sprint toward the peak of the invincible realm. But for an invincible realm expert like Gu Qianchuan, who barely entered the holy list after stabilizing his realm, it was almost impossible to enter the divine list. It was not impossible to break through to the invincible realm, but every small step would become extremely difficult. It was as difficult as climbing to the sky. And with Li Tianlan's potential and current conditions, Wang Tianzong didn't even want to think about it. If he solved his own problems and rushed into the invincible realm, not to mention rushing into the divine list, he was very likely to go straight to the peak of the divine list. The 100% peak of the invincible realm was the real chosen one. Li Tianlan still had a long way to go to enter the invincible realm, and there were many troubles to solve. But Wang Tianzong didn't want to wait. It was best to be safe. Chapter 390. The closer they got to the army headquarters building, the colder the streets of Yuzhou became. The army headquarters building was located at number 7 Fuxing Road in Yuzhou. It was not a busy place, but it was not remote either. However, after the location of the high-level meeting was finalized, the Zhongzhou Police Department had deployed overnight. Fuxing Road entered the second-level alert 6 hours ago, the first-level alert 3 hours ago, and the entire area was under martial law an hour ago. Under traffic control, the whole road became wide and clean. The black Mercedes-Benz crossed the square and stopped in front of the main entrance of the army headquarters building. Li Tianlan got out of the car and opened the door for Dong Qingwudi. Dong Qingwudi smiled, patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder, and said softly, "Don't rush back after the meeting. Now that you are in Yuzhou, you need to get to know some people. Especially the people in this building." Although the special warfare system is independent of the army headquarters, the two systems are in frequent contact. No matter where East Emperor Palace is in the future, it will need the support of the military. Li Tianlan nodded and responded. He looked up and down at the majestic and broad white building. Standing in front of the gate and looking at the army headquarters building, all he could see was the broad and thick white building. There was no atmosphere of power, only silence. The silence was a little solemn. This was the first time that Li Tianlan had an intersection with the core department of Zhongzhou State since he entered the secular world, and he was about to have an intersection with the entire high-level officials of Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan felt a little strange and complicated, and he was lost in thought for a while. Two middle-aged men with different clothes and temperament walked quickly out of the building of the army headquarters. The man walking in the front was a little older, in his 50s. He wore a military uniform with 2 golden stars shining on his shoulders. He was not a handsome general, and his appearance was even a little rustic, but his temperament was clean and calm. He wore more than a dozen medals on his chest. In the morning light, the medals and the general stars were shining at the same time, which looked a little weird. Behind the lieutenant general was a middle-aged man in a black suit. He was thin and had a calm expression on his face. He followed beside the lieutenant general calmly, and all the aura on his body was perfectly restrained. He was silent, like a shadow. Li Tianlan's eyes flashed, and he took a serious look at the man. He was an expert. The man's aura was restrained so perfectly that even with Li Tianlan's current perception, it was difficult to judge his strength. He could only be sure that the man's strength was definitely above the thunder-shocking realm. "Minister." The lieutenant general glanced at Li Tianlan. He was obviously Dong Qingwudi's confidant. They were very familiar, so even the salute was casual. Not bad. Dong Qingwudi looked at the neat medals on the lieutenant general's chest and said with a chuckle, "Congratulations." "Headquarters." The lieutenant general smiled meaningfully. "Minister." A middle-aged man in a black suit walked up and greeted them in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Dong Qingwudi nodded with a smile. Qingfeng, let me introduce you." Li Tianlan, the young governor of Sai City, won first place in the maneuver of the 2 academies, and founded the East Emperor Palace. Tianlan, by secretary, by Tianlan, is. Li. Qingfeng, Tianlan, this young minister. Master. Is. Minister. Qing is. Knowing who was on his side, Li Tianlan first extended his hand to Hua Qingfeng and said with a smile, "Boss Hua, it's an honor to meet you. This, I've heard of you for a long time, wasn't fake at all." In the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, the Shadow Sect could be said to be the only one that set up its organization inside the Hidden Dragon Sea, except for Kunlun City. The Shadow Sect was a new force in Zhongzhou State. It had a short time to rise, but its status was extremely important. Back then, Hua Qingfeng split from the Zhongzhou State's old martial arts force, Azura Path, and entered the Hidden Dragon Sea. At first, he was just the chief bodyguard of a top tycoon in Zhongzhou State. In just over 10 years, he established the Shadow Sect, controlled the security department, and became known to the world as one of the top 10 contemporary experts in Zhongzhou State twice in a row. Today, the bodyguards of the Hidden Dragon Sea, whether they were elites of the Shadow Sect or not, could be said to be from Hua Qingfeng. He could be regarded as the king of bodyguards in Zhongzhou State. Hua Qingfeng held Li Tianlan's hand. His palm was rough and hard, like a stone. He was a person who didn't like to smile, but in the face of Li Tianlan, a smile still appeared on his face. Your Highness, the President and I also saw the maneuver of the two academies in Star State. Your Highness's power is amazing. Li Tianlan thanked him with a smile and turned to look at Bai Qingzhao. Secretary General Bai Qingzhao was also looking at Li Tianlan. The look in his eyes was extremely complicated. Uncle Bai. Li Tianlan held his hand like a junior. Bai Qingzhao smiled and shook Li Tianlan's hand hard, but his eyes fell on Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi turned his eyes and looked at the star flag fluttering in front of the army headquarters building. Bai Qingzhao laughed at himself. Uncle Bai? It's so King harsh. I'll take you to the conference room. Bai Qingzhao said. Hua Qingfeng said at the same time, Minister, the President is waiting for you in the small conference room. Before the meeting officially begins, he wants to talk to you. Dongqing Wudi nodded and glanced at Li Tianlan. I'll go with Uncle Bai. Marshal, don't worry about me. Dongqing Wudi said, The four of them entered the army headquarters building at the same time and took 2 elevators. Before entering the elevator, Hua Qingfeng seemed to think of something. He looked at Bai Qingzhao and said with a smile, Secretary General, congratulations. Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingzhao's faces changed at the same time. It was really weird for Hua Qingfeng to say this from his point of view. Hua Qingfeng's face did not change, and his smile was completely sincere. There's nothing to congratulate. Bai Qingzhao shook his head. His good mood seemed to have become a little bad. Dongqing Wudi glared at him calmly, turned around, and walked into the elevator. The elevator went up. Li Tianlan and Bai Qingzhao, who met for the first time, looked at the constantly jumping numbers in the elevator in silence. Uncle Bai is also attending this meeting? Li Tianlan took the initiative to ask. Bai Qingzhao smiled and said, In addition to me, there are several old generals. Li Tianlan looked at the medal on his chest and suddenly thought of today's day. August 1st. For the soldiers of Zhongzhou State, this day was extremely important. Almost every year, a group of military generals would be conferred titles on this day. Some were really promoted and put in an important position, and some retired honorably after being promoted 1 rank. Thinking of what Dongqing Wudi had just said, Li Tianlan suddenly understood. Bai Qingzhao was now the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters with the rank of Lieutenant General. He was undoubtedly one of the people who would be awarded the rank of General today. It was difficult to remove the title of Deputy Secretary General now, but after his rank was promoted, Bai Qingzhao would also have more leverage to check and balance the real Secretary General of the Special Warfare Group. Dongqing Wudi's influence in the Army Headquarters building would also expand again. Li Tianlan suddenly said. Bai Qingzhao turned around and looked at Li Tianlan in surprise. He did not expect that Li Tianlan said sorry instead of congratulating him. He even thought that he had heard wrong. It's all a trifle. Bai Qingzhao looked at Li Tianlan for a long time and suddenly laughed. He reached out and patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder, repeating again, It's all a trifle. Li Tianlan smiled and did not say much. How could it be a trifle? After confirming Bai Qingzhao's promotion today, Li Tianlan realized what the high-level meeting held in the Army Headquarters building meant. Dongqing Wudi did not know in advance that he would be specially invited to the meeting. But inviting him to the meeting might not be without the giant group's intention. Li Tianlan's eyes were complicated. He knew very well that he could appear here today. In addition to his relationship with Samsara Palace, which was worthy of Zhongzhou State's high attention, the giant group also wanted to stand at the highest level and declare his close relationship with them. Bai Qingzhao's promotion could not be without a price. Especially after Dongqing Wudi so domineeringly mobilized the army to interfere in the maneuver of the 2 academies. All this could only mean one thing. The transaction between the giant group and the southeast group had begun. The content of the transaction was the hundreds of thousands of elite troops of the Border Control Corps. Such a transaction, from intention to final decision, took less than a day from the end of the maneuver to now. Bai Qingzhao's promotion expanded Dongqing Wudi's right to speak in the army headquarters, but it also hurt the interests of the Secretary-General of the Army Headquarters of the Special Warfare Group. So in other words, the Wang family of Beihai had now given up cooperation with Kunlun City and turned to trade with the Dongqing clan. The relationship between friend and foe changed in a day, so fast that people had no time to react. Hundreds of thousands of troops, 5 ace armies, and countless changes in positions were destined to be impossible to complete in one day. So it was certain that before the transaction of the Border Control Corps was completed, the Wang family of Beihai and the Dongqing clan would be in a honeymoon period, and there would be no possibility of cooperation with Kunlun City. At the same time, it also meant that Li Tianlan's situation was absolutely safe during the transaction. After thinking of Hua Qingfeng's congratulations just now, Bai Qingzhao and Dongqing Wudi's faces changed. Hua Qingfeng was a capable general of the academics, and the academics must be one of the beneficiaries of this transaction. His congratulations on this occasion was indeed more like satire, but it also meant that the Border Control Corps did have an extraordinary meaning for the giant group. Especially for the Dongqing clan, for the past 2 decades, the Border Control Corps was almost equivalent to the Dongqing clan's establishment in Zhongzhou State, and everything that was conducive to the ranks of the world's super-wealthy families. It could be seen from the fact that Dongqing Wudi still held the position of commander of the Border Control Corps after entering Yuzhou that the Dongqing clan did not want to give up the Border Control Corps at the beginning. There would be a lot of room for operation, very much so. This was the second year that Dongqing Wudi held the position of commander of the Border Control Corps. If Dongqing Wudi didn't want to give it up, he could finish this term and then hand over the position. At that time, the commanders of the Border Control Corps would still be his people, and at most 2 would be transferred, which would be harmless. After the next term, Dongqing Wudi would retire, and the Dongqing clan could use the position he retired to exchange for more things and support a new commander of the Border Control Corps they supported. At that time, the Dongqing clan would still be a giant military giant. That was the safest way. But because of the final maneuver, Dongqing Wudi had come to this point. There were pros and cons. The Dongqing clan gave up the core Border Control Corps. In the next 2 terms, the Dongqing clan's influence in the military would expand to the whole situation. But unless Dongqing Wudi could hold the entire army headquarters in his own hands, when he retired, the Dongqing clan's scattered forces in the overall situation would definitely be squeezed. Of course, it was not that there was no solution. Dongqing Wudi's term was about 8 years away. If the East Emperor Palace developed strong enough in 8 years and overturned Kunlun City, and Li Tianlan was not so ungrateful, then the Dongqing clan and even the 3 pillar families of the giant group that supported him would change. The most thorough transformation. The Dongqing clan was undoubtedly blocking. They had put all their chips on Li Tianlan's future, and now there was no way out. They could have had the safest way. But they made such a crazy choice. The safest was the best? Li Tianlan was silent. At least he knew that if Dongqing Wudi had not mobilized the army to intervene in the maneuver of the 2 academies yesterday and had not fought to save his life, the Dongqing clan might have been under pressure, but they might have been able to cope with it. At least they would have taken the initiative. But now, the initiative had become passive. There was no other choice. At this time, many people in the giant group were gnashing their teeth with hatred. Was Bai Qingzhao one of them? Li Tianlan didn't know, but he really owed the Dongqing clan and the giant group an apology. Because the Li family, which had made a comeback, also had no way out. Li Honghe was defending, and Li Tianlan was destined to be the Li family's last chance. The Dongqing clan now chose to share this risk with the Li family for him. If Li Tianlan succeeded, the Dongqing clan would go to a higher level. But similarly, if Li Tianlan failed, the Dongqing clan would also be extremely tragic and no one would have a good end. If these were trivial matters, what was the big deal? Li Tianlan looked at Bai Qingzhao's rustic face. He thought he would see a smile that was a little hypocritical or at least a little helpless. But in his sight, Bai Qingzhao's smile was not forced at all, only peaceful. I'm telling you the truth. Bai Qingzhao chuckled and said, I don't mind Wudi's choice. The Bai family doesn't mind either. I even think this is his best choice. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. When he was about to speak, the elevator had already made a clear sound. The elevator doors opened to both sides. Go to the meeting first. Bai Qingzhao said, we have plenty of time to talk after the meeting. Then let Wudi take you to his home. The conference room of the army headquarters was really big. The conference room with an area of more than 1,000 square meters was lit up. The orange light was not dazzling, but it shone on every corner of the conference room. The long conference table was clean and elegant, with flowers in the center. The brightly colored star flag model was extremely exquisite, placed in front of the flowers. 2 rows of comfortable and spacious leather sofas were placed around the conference table. The sofas were very high, so they looked a little solemn. There were evenly symmetrical indoor fountains on both sides of the conference room. The sound of water flowing was pleasant and clear. The walls were covered with countless photos of the past presidents of Zhongzhou State, the standing ministers of the army headquarters, some outstanding generals, fearless martyrs, and outstanding heroes of the military industry. Li Tianlan even saw more than one photo of his grandpa. There were still 15 minutes before the start of the meeting. Several members of the decision-making committee who came from different places overnight had already sat in their seats in advance. Li Tianlan had seen 2 of them. Zhong Yongming, the top leader of Huding. Yi Dongsheng, the deputy minister of the army headquarters, the chief of the general staff, known as the god of army of Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan was not familiar with the others. This meeting was confidential. There were no secretaries or staff in the conference room. Bai Qingzhao took Li Tianlan around the conference room and introduced them one by one. It was impossible for them to be familiar with each other in such a short time. Li Tianlan greeted them one by one, including several deputy ministers of the cabinet, 2 deputy ministers of the army headquarters, and the top leaders of Nanyue, Huading, Beijiang, and Southwest. Li Tianlan called them by their titles. These big shots, who could be regarded as leaders in Zhongzhou State, could at least be polite on the surface no matter what they thought. Except for Zhong Yongming, who had a grudge against Li Tianlan, who called him Little Highness indifferently, the others called him Highness more politely, which sounded like it. The 2 walked around the conference room. In the end, Bai Qingzhao took Li Tianlan to an old man who was closer to the main seat. The old man wore a Chinese tunic suit that did not match the luxury of the conference room. His face was slightly dark, and he looked like an old farmer who had dedicated his life to the Yellow Land. When Li Tianlan looked at him, he was also observing Li Tianlan. There was an imperceptible sharpness in his turbid eyes. This is Secretary Bai of Yuzhou. Bai Qingzhao introduced with a serious face. Li Tianlan couldn't help glancing at Bai Qingzhao. If the information he had was right, this Secretary Bai in front of him was Bai Qingzhao's father. Li Tianlan was not used to such a serious introduction. Secretary Bai. Li Tianlan bowed slightly and reached out his hand. Welcome back to Yuzhou. Bai Zhanfang, the oldest and most senior leader of Yuzhou, shook Li Tianlan's hand. He looked at Li Tianlan and said calmly, "Come to my home when you have time." Li Tianlan nodded. Bai Zhanfang pointed to a circle of sofas on the periphery. "Sit there." The sofas around the conference table were naturally reserved for the high-level officials. And the people who were specially invited to the high-level meeting would generally sit on the periphery. Bai Qingzhao and Li Tianlan chose a seat at random and sat down. An old man who looked very young but was actually as old as Bai Zhanfang walked into the conference room with a smile. There was a very calm smile on his very dignified square face. His eyes looked around the conference room and then fell on Li Tianlan. His smile grew wider. Li Tianlan, who had just sat down, stood up again. The corner of his mouth moved. Thinking of Bai Qingzhao's seriousness when he introduced Bai Zhanfang on this occasion, he also changed the way he addressed him and said with a smile, "Prime Minister Wu." Deputy Prime Minister Wu Jingmin, who ranked last in the cabinet, nodded, walked over, and sat down casually beside Li Tianlan. He was one of the deputy prime minister of the cabinet and could participate in high-level meetings, but he had not yet entered the decision-making committee. During the transition period of these months, he had been sitting here. In the more than 20 years since the collapse of the Li family, Wu Jingmin had been able to steadily occupy Xianxia. In addition to his great courage to fight with the major factions, he had been following the rules. Not being pushed was also one of the important reasons why he could be as stable as Mount Tai. Qing Zhao, congratulations. Wu Jingmin glanced at Bai Qingzhao with a smile and said. Bai Qingzhao shook his head with a wry smile. Prime Minister Wu, you know what's going on. This congratulations sounds too harsh. It's not harsh. Wu Jingmin smiled and said, in my opinion, it's just right. Zhanfang is about the same age as me. If you can take a step forward now, he can also feel more at ease. Bai Qingzhao was stunned and looked at his father's back. Li Tianlan glanced at Wu Jingmin. Bai Zhanfang had passed the retirement age. After this session, he would definitely retire. Bai Qingzhao was now taking advantage of the situation to go further in rank. When Bai Zhanfang retired, the giant group could use this reason to retire Bai Qingqian and Bai Zhanfang together. At present, there was a lot of resistance to Bai Qingqian's progress. But as long as Bai Qingzhao could smoothly become the Secretary General of the Army headquarters, the status of the Bai family would still be unshakable. The Dongqing clan put the future on him, and the Bai family and the Zhou family tied the future with the Dongqing clan. Feeling the harmonious relationship between Wu Jingmin and Bai Qingzhao, Li Tianlan suddenly found that he was a little out of breath. Today's meeting, Tianlan, has little to do with you. It's mainly about the Samsara Palace. Remember, don't express your position casually. Wu Jingmin glanced at Li Tianlan, whose face was a little gloomy, and suddenly said with a smile. Li Tianlan nodded silently. At 6:25. Members of parliament from Zhongzhou State stepped into the conference room one after another. At about 6:30, the faces that Li Tianlan could often see on the Zhongzhou State news broadcast began to appear. But the way they appeared was extremely strange. Li Tianlan was not the only one who felt strange. Everyone felt that it was strange. Chen Fangqing, the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, and Guo Wenian, the President of the National Assembly, walked into the conference room first. The two talked all the way looking solemn. They were the two banners of the Prince Group today. Then Zhou Mulin, the Speaker of the Zhongzhou State Political Consultative Assembly, walked into the conference room in silence and made a brief eye contact with Bai Zhanfang, the top leader of Yuzhou. Before Dongqing Wudi entered Yuzhou and became a director, Speaker Zhou Mulin had always been the pillar of the giant group. Zhou Yunhai, the Minister of the Ministry of Politics and Law, walked in silently and sat in his seat. After greeting others, he drank tea in silence, as if it had nothing to do with him. The North Group could be said to be the weakest force among the six groups. When the situation was sensitive, they generally chose to remain neutral. Then came Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State and the leader of the Special Warfare Group, who was pale but forced a smile. After he came in, he looked straight ahead and did not even look at Li Tianlan. Three giants who were talking softly walked into the conference room together after Gu Xingyun. Everyone stood up. Li Huaqing, the president of Zhongzhou State. Dongqing Wudi, the minister of Army Headquarters. Hua Jingyang, the second prime minister of Zhongzhou State. The two pillars of the academics and the leader of the giant group walked into the conference room at the same time. President Li Huaqing waved his hand calmly with a smile and motioned for everyone to sit down. He walked steadily and sat down in the main seat. He glanced around and said softly, "There are still a few comrades who haven't arrived yet. Let's wait." There was silence in the conference room, and the atmosphere was depressing and solemn. Today's meeting was not easy. Whether it was the attack on the Im garrison or the internal changes in the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, it was not a topic that could make people relax. Li Huaqing quietly watched every member in the conference room and drank tea quietly. At 6:30, the door of the conference room was pushed open again. Except for a few directors, almost everyone stood up again. When Li Huaqing came in, they called the president. But the one who entered the conference room on time was called His Majesty. There were two majesties in the world. There was only one majesty in the dark world. There was also only one in Zhongzhou State. Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong. Li Tianlan quietly looked at Wang Tianzong's always calm face. Four people walked into the conference room. Wang Tianzong walked in the front. The other two giants of Zhongzhou State were on his left and right. They were the two leaders of the Southeast Group. Ji Wenzhang, the director of the Ministry of Supervision of Zhongzhou State. Wan Qingyun, the vice president. Behind the two directors was Di Jiang, the first disciple of the Sword Emperor. 9 directors. A state-protecting war god. All the members of parliament. All the specially invited members were present. Di Jiang glanced at Li Tianlan and sat down nearby. But Wang Tianzong did not come over. Instead, he sat down directly at the other end of the conference table opposite Li Huaqing. At both ends of the long conference table were the president and the Sword Emperor. On both sides were the directors and the members of parliament. There were flowers in the middle of the conference table. The Sword Emperor and the president sat opposite each other. Looking from Li Tianlan's position, it was hard to tell which was the main seat for a while. "Sorry," Wang Tianzong said blandly, "I was delayed on the way." "Understandable." Li Huaqing nodded and said calmly, "Everyone is here. There is no need to repeat more words. We are pressed for time. Let's connect now." Dong Chengwudi stood up expressionlessly and turned on the 2 screens in the conference room. The 2 screens lit up at the same time to ensure that everyone sitting in different positions could see the contents of the screen. On the screen was a communication request. The communication was quickly connected. In the early morning of Zhongzhou State, the other end of the screen seemed to be at dusk. The sun was still setting on the horizon. On the screen, there was fire and a large area of wreckage. Countless people were carrying stretchers and running in a hurry. Some doctors in white coats were shuttling back and forth in a hurry. Shouts, screams, and curses were heard. It seemed to be a military base in the picture, but the whole base had been destroyed beyond recognition. Countless camps had completely collapsed. Soldiers in military uniforms of Zhongzhou State patrolled in a daze. Only the star flag of Zhongzhou State was still fluttering in the wind. "It's 2 o'clock in the morning and it's the polar day." Wang Qianchong, commander of the Arctic Ocean Command of Zhongzhou State, reports to the decision-making committee. A middle-aged man in a general's uniform appeared on the screen. His face was a little dirty and his spirit looked a little tired. Wang Tianzong's cousin, the kind that is very close. Bai Qingzhao introduced calmly. "Comrade Qianchong, how is the situation of the garrison base?" Li Huaqing asked calmly. "It can't get any worse," Wang Qianchong said without hesitation, with obvious anger on his face. "President, I arrived at the garrison base 2 hours ago. At present, many of our soldiers are still trapped in the ruins waiting for rescue. We have a lot of casualties. The situation in Eastern Europe is very chaotic now. I'm willing to report to the decision-making committee in detail, but I want to ask for domestic reinforcements first. The sooner, the better. What reinforcements do you want?" Li Huaqing thought for a while and asked in a deep voice. "The Jiang family of South America, Knights Templars, the Heroes Club. Now Europe has gathered almost all the superpowers in the Dark World. Their masters and my soldiers are very difficult to deal with. Our country should send the elites of the special warfare system to stabilize the situation. President, if possible, I suggest restarting the Snowdance Corps." Wang Qianchong stared at Li Huaqing's eyes through the screen. Restarting the Snowdance Corps. Everyone was stunned. Li Huaqing took a quick look at Wang Tianzong. The Snowdance Corps. It was the Special Warfare Corps of Zhongzhou State that set off the final battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago. If the final battle of Heaven Capital was won, the Snowdance Corps would occupy the right to speak in the Dark World of East Island and become the most powerful force in the Dark World of East Island. However, the final winner of the final battle of Heaven Capital was the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The Snowdance Corps had been disbanded after the final battle of Heaven Capital. Although the first marshal, Gu Qianchuan, was still a marshal, he had no actual position. Restarting the Snowdance Corps? Wang Qianchong was one of the core forces of the Southeast Group. Now he suddenly made such a sensitive proposal, and no one believed that it was his own idea. Not only Li Huaqing. Almost everyone naturally thought of Wang Tianzong. Thinking of Wang Tianzong, they naturally thought of Dijiang, who Wang Tianzong brought. He had the combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 36. Dual thunder veins. He had been entangled with the purgatory of heaven capital in Tianan for 3 years without losing ground. There was no doubt that if the Snowdance Corps was restarted, Dijiang was the most suitable candidate for the position of marshal, and it was also a very good gold-plated route. After the Snowdance Corps entered Eastern Europe and the situation stabilized, Dijiang could be transferred back as soon as possible. At that time, if he replaced Dongqing Wudi in the decision-making committee and became a member of parliament, he would sit in the position of the Border Control Corps, and there would be no problem in terms of prestige. The Ain garrison was attacked. This was tantamount to giving Zhongzhou state a reason to intervene in the situation in Eastern Europe. But at the same time, it was also tantamount to giving Wang Tianzong a chance to pave the way for his disciple. Li Huaqing glanced at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi was also a little surprised. He had thought that Dongqing Wudi would give up the position of commander of the Border Control Corps at today's meeting. At present, it seemed that he could delay it for a while. Tianzong, what do you think? Li Huaqing saw that Wang Tianzong did not express his opinion, so he directly asked him by name. I agree with Commander Wang Qianchong. If the chaos in Eastern Europe gets out of control, the north of our country, not only Beihai province, but also the northeast, will suffer a serious impact. This happened at our doorstep, and Zhongzhou state must show its attitude. The Snowdance Corps is a special warfare battalion. It is very suitable for them to go to snow country. Wang Tianzong said indifferently. There was a very strange light flashing in his eyes. So who's marshal? Li Huaqing looked at Wang Tianzong, but he was looking at Dijiang out of the corner of his eyes. Dijiang was indeed qualified to represent Zhongzhou state in the battle. I have a nomination. I think he is the best candidate for the new marshal of the Snowdance Corps. I hope the decision-making committee can seriously consider it. Wang Tianzong said. Who? Although he already knew who it was, Li Huaqing still asked. Wang Tianzong lowered his eyelids and said calmly, Li Dunlun. No. Dongqing Wudi and Gu Xingyun's faces changed dramatically, and they spoke almost at the same time. Chapter 391. The atmosphere in the conference room became extremely weird for a while. The restart of the Snowdance Corps was expected by everyone. But no one would expect Wang Tianzong to nominate Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was only 22 years old this year. He had the combat capability that everyone recognized, but it was unrealistic for everyone to be the marshal of a special warfare corps at such a young age. And from Wang Tianzong's standpoint, he had no reason to nominate Li Tianlan. What was this? So Gu Xingyun's objection was not surprising. In this conference room with a clear position but a hole, people clearly saw the anger and coldness on Gu Xingyun's face. He was a student a day ago. He became a marshal a day later? The only thing that remained unchanged was the young man. But if everything became a reality, would it really not change? How could it not change? Gu Xingyun had already decided that even during his recovery period he would use all the resources of the Special Warfare Group to crush the East Emperor Palace. Whether Li Tianlan was in the northeast, in Huading, or in Jiangxia, he would make the development of the East Emperor Palace extremely difficult. Let Li Tianlan be the marshal of the Snowdance Corps? This was a meteoric rise. If possible, Gu Xingyun didn't want to give Li Tianlan the position of an ordinary lieutenant, let alone the marshal. His reaction was quick. He said no very quickly. But after saying that, he froze for a moment. He didn't wonder that he opposed it. But Dongqing Wudi also opposed it? What was going on? He raised his eyelids and glanced at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi's expression was calm and determined. It was an unquestionable face. Gu Xingyun's chaotic heart gradually calmed down, and he looked at Wang Tianzong again. Wang Tianzong's gaze fell on his face. It was as if he was looking at an idiot. He really thought that Gu Xingyun's objection was extremely stupid. He didn't expect that Li Tianlan, who was strong but not threatening for the time being, would make Gu Xingyun nervous to this extent. He glanced at Gu Xingyun and then said calmly, I insist on my nomination. Gu Xingyun was indeed a little confused. He hadn't figured out what was going on for the time being, so he instinctively became silent. Everyone was silent. The atmosphere became more and more weird. Li Tianlan quickly glanced at the conference room. He sat on the periphery of the conference table and could only see the faces of half of the high-level officials, as well as the side faces of Li Huaqing and Wang Tianzong. The other half had their backs to him. He did not expect that Wang Tianzong would nominate him to be the Marshal of the Snowdance Corps. This Special Warfare Legion only existed in name after their defeat in the Battle of Tiandu. But this did not mean that the Snowdance Corps had really disappeared. Once the Snowdance Corps was restarted, its specifications would not be reduced at all. It would still be the original specifications. In the past, the Snowdance Corps was a real behemoth in the entire special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. It was an army composed of elites from all over the country, from the younger generation to the older generation. It included the special operations bureaus of all provinces, major martial arts forces, major independent special warfare agencies, military elites, special forces, and other departments. Once the Snowdance Corps was restarted, it would definitely become the top priority of Kunlun City. Its status was similar to the relationship between the Border Control Corps and the Army Headquarters of Zhongzhou State. The Border Control Corps had many names. God of Slaughter Legion, East City Legion, but those were all titles with various meanings. In terms of power, the Border Control Corps, which had nearly 600,000 troops, had always been called the small army headquarters of Zhongzhou State. If the Snowdance Corps was restarted, it would almost be another small Kunlun city in the special warfare system. In the beginning, Gu Xingyun could agree to the establishment of the Snowdance Corps. In addition to the fact that Gu Qianchuan served as the first marshal, the Snowdance Corps was stationed in East Island for a long time after the victory, so it was difficult for it to affect the affairs of Zhongzhou State. But if Li Tianlan were to control the Snowdance Corps, how could he be willing to stay abroad? To be honest, for a moment, Li Tianlan was really a little tempted. But being tempted did not mean accepting. He would never believe in Wang Tianzong's kindness. Once he showed these, it would be abnormal. There must be something wrong with the abnormality. Comrades, let's talk. Li Huaqing sat in the main seat and took the initiative to break the silence. His tone was simple and peaceful without any emotional fluctuations. In terms of strength, Tianlan is indeed qualified to lead a special warfare legion. But the situation in Eastern Europe is too complicated and chaotic. Tianlan is still young, and he may not be able to control the situation. I personally suggest that it is more appropriate to send a relatively experienced and prudent person to Eastern Europe. Dongqing Wudi said without hesitation, and his attitude was extremely clear. I object to the nomination of His Majesty Sword Emperor. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Yi Dongxing, the Deputy Minister of the Army Headquarters, said with a smile, the strength of His Highness Li Tianlan is recognized by everyone. Although His Highness is young, he should get enough respect and status in the dark world. Minister being young is not a bad thing. It also represents the courage and passion that we old guys don't have. If the Snowdance Corps is restarted, under the leadership of His Highness Li Tianlan, it may be able to better open up the situation in Eastern Europe. I agree with Marshal Yi. On the screen, Wang Qinzhong, the commander of the Arctic Ocean Command of Zhongzhou State, said solemnly, the situation in Eastern Europe is chaotic. All the major forces in the dark world have regarded Eastern Europe as a battlefield. In the current situation, if we want to keep our own interests and even get more, what Zhongzhou State needs is not steadiness, but sharpness and sharpness. From this point of view, the performance of His Highness Tianlan is obvious to all. I agree that His Highness Li Tianlan should be the commander of the Snowdance Corps. Sharpness and sharpness are one thing, and experience is another. Zhou Mulin, another leader of the giant group, stood up and said calmly, Tianlan has no experience in leading a comprehensive corps at present. But His Highness Dijiang of the Wang family of Beihai has led the Freedom Corps in Tianan in the past few years, and has made great achievements. His Highness Dijiang is also young and does not lack the sharpness you mentioned. I think the commander of the Snowdance Corps is most suitable for His Highness Dijiang. Dongqing Wudi and Zhou Mulin, who should have supported Li Tianlan, supported Dijiang. And the Southeast Group, which should have supported Dijiang the most, supported Li Tianlan. The atmosphere became more and more weird. Gu Xingyun, who was a little confused, finally realized something. He hesitated for a moment, a little hesitant. There was no doubt that the Wang family of Beihai, the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, and the Southeast Group were gambling again. And it was a real big gamble. Just like in the case of treason more than 20 years ago, Summer Solstice, the hostess of the Wang family of Beihai, used herself as a bargaining chip to block the Li family. This time, Wang Tianzong used himself as a bargaining chip to block the giant group. Li Tianlan and the Snowdance Corps were the two sides of the bet. The future of the Wang family of Beihai and the giant group was the bet. This was destined to be an extremely tragic game. But this time, just like more than 20 years ago, Gu Xingyun did not think that the Wang family of Beihai had the possibility of losing. In the somewhat silent atmosphere, some long-sealed memories came into his mind. About the Li family and the Border Control Corps. At the beginning, the Border Control Corps was not as large as it was today. When the concept of Border Praetorian Guard was first put forward, the Border Control Corps was completely planned based on the Special Warfare Corps. Just like the Snowdance Corps today. And it was the Southeast Group that put forward the concept of Border Praetorian Guard. To be exact, it was the Wang family of Beihai. It was also the Wang family of Beihai who pushed Li Guangtu to sit in the position of the first commander of the Border Control Corps. At that time, Li Honghe was still the war god, and he was close to the Wang family of Beihai. So the support of the Wang family of Beihai seemed to be okay so far. But at that time, did the Wang family of Beihai really not notice anything? Gu Xingyun suddenly felt that today's scene was very familiar. It was like reincarnation. The old things of reincarnation, the history of reincarnation, the beginning and the end of reincarnation. After 3 years in Tiannan, Dijiang has matured. He should take on a more important position. In fact, everyone should know that before taking charge of the Tiannan Freedom Corps, Dijiang also had no experience. Minister Dongqing, Speaker Zhou, I don't think we should be prejudiced against young people. The dark world has been turbulent in recent years. I think it's time for our young people to grow up quickly. They should take on more arduous tests and responsibilities. I agree with His Majesty Sword Emperor's nomination. Li Tianlan is worthy of everyone's trust and reassurance as the commander of the Snowdance Corps. More and more memories began to become clear in his mind. Gu Xingyun's tone began to become calm and calm. I don't think it's appropriate. We can't take a Special Warfare Corps or even the Arctic Ocean Command as a joke. Bai Zhanfang put down the teacup in his hand and said in an old-fashioned tone, I understand Minister Dongqing's feelings. A voice suddenly sounded after Bai Zhanfang. It was very steady, but extremely abrupt. No one thought that he would speak at such a meeting. Therefore, his speech seemed particularly earth-shattering. But excessive protection is not necessarily good for His Highness Li Tianlan. His Highness is the chosen one, so he is destined to bear more. If he can't even bear a corps today, how can he protect the entire Zhongzhou state in the future? These words were extremely serious. The faces of Dongqing Wudi and Gu Xingyun twitched at the same time. Minister Zhou Yunhai. It turned out to be Zhou Yunhai of the Ministry of Politics and Law. This flag figure of the northern faction ranked last among the 9 directors. In the usual meetings, unless they were discussing purely state affairs or the content about the northern faction or the content about the Ministry of Politics and Law, this director basically wouldn't say a word of nonsense. However, in such a sensitive meeting today, he stood on the opposite side of the giant group. To be exact, he supported the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group. Because his last sentence was also extremely offensive to Kunlun City. Zhou Yunhai's statement was simply clear. Why was it like this? Everyone was looking at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong lowered his eyelids and drank tea silently. Except for the first 2 sentences, he didn't speak much. I agree with this nomination. Ji Wenzhang, the director of the Ministry of Supervision, expressed his attitude straightforwardly. Agree. 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 Voices rang out in the conference room one after another, unhurried, calm, and sure. Dong Chengwudi's face became more and more gloomy. The Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group united. From the directors to the members of parliament, they all expressed their attitudes very clearly. It seems that this nomination is expected. In a low and gentle voice, Chen Fangqing, the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, showed a smile. I also think we should give young people some opportunities. Comrade Wang Qianzhong is right. What Zhongzhou State needs now is not calmness, but vigor and sharpness. Wherever our soldiers are stationed, there will be the dignity of Zhongzhou State. The Jiang family of South America? Knights Templar? I will inform the diplomatic department to make a statement later. In addition, I also hope that the Snowdance Corps, under the leadership of Tianlan, can teach these two forces a lesson and tell the world that the army and star flag of Zhongzhou State are inviolable. Dong Chengwudi spoke again. His voice was low. Everyone looked at the standing minister of the army headquarters. Yesterday, he dared to confront Sword Emperor in the Sky Academy without retreating. He had the strength, the power, the status, and the qualification. But now, what else could he do? Wang Tianzong was just a nomination. Whether he succeeded or not depended on the will of the entire Zhongzhou State. Just like Wang Tianzong did not dare to attack those soldiers yesterday. Dong Chengwudi could not go against the will of the decision-making committee. Otherwise, it would be treason. Dong Chengwudi turned his head and looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan sat calmly in the chair, neither arrogant nor rash, neither sad nor happy. The two looked at each other for a moment. Dong Chengwudi's eyes were complicated and determined, with a touch of apology. Li Tianlan remained calm. Everyone. Dong Chengwudi spoke again. Li Tianlan can't be the commander of the Snowdance Corps. He seemed to have made up his mind, so his words were clear and loud. What's the reason? Wang Tianzong looked at Dong Chengwudi calmly. Dong Chengwudi gritted his teeth, and his eyes seemed to spurt fire. The reason? The muscles at the corners of his mouth trembled, and his voice seemed to be distorted. He never thought that one day he would open the most painful scar of the Li family in front of Li Tianlan. But he had no choice. Li Tianlan really could not take charge of the Snowdance Corps. For Dong Chengwudi, the smell of conspiracy in Wang Tianzong's nomination this time was totally overwhelming. He thought that the Wang family of Beihai and the Dongcheng clan would be in a honeymoon period during the transaction of the Border Control Corps. That might be right, but the Wang family of Beihai obviously did not intend to keep the honeymoon period between the two sides for a long time. Dong Chengwudi did not believe that Wang Tianzong would give up killing Li Tianlan. So why did he support Li Tianlan today? Wang Tianzong did not attack Li Tianlan in the Sky Academy, but chose to leave. Obviously, he encountered something that had to compromise. But Dong Chengwudi was very clear about the extreme style of the Wang family of Beihai. They could not compromise forever, and Wang Tianzong's killing intent would not disappear. Obviously, Wang Tianzong supported Li Tianlan because he wanted to press Li Tianlan in Snow Country and put him in the most obvious position. In this way, when he solved the problem, he could find Li Tianlan at any time and kill him with a sword. Even if he worried about the domestic attitude, it would be easy to find Li Tianlan in Snow Country. He could cooperate with other superpowers and kill people with a borrowed knife. With the background of the Wang family of Beihai, no superpower in the world would refuse to cooperate with them. Once Li Tianlan became a marshal. In any case, he could not be too far away from the Snowdance Corps. And the most important thing was, Dong Chengwudi did not want to play a game with Wang Tianzong at the gambling table. What Gu Xingyun could understand, he could understand too, and he understood it earlier than Gu Xingyun. The situation in Eastern Europe was so chaotic, and there were so many unimaginable variables. Li Tianlan took the Snowdance Corps to participate in it. Countless conspiracies and calculations were going on almost all the time in the general trend. The enemy's calculation. The calculation of his own people. In such a chaotic environment, it was even easier to plot something than it was more than 20 years ago. In the Snowdance Corps, if Li Tianlan was not careful, he would be doomed eternally. Death was not the only thing that could doom people eternally. There was also crime. Treason. In all kinds of conspiracies and chaos, if the Wang family of Beihai reenacted the treason case on the border, Li Tianlan would die. The Li family, which had made a comeback, would disappear completely. And the Dongqing clan, which had been tied to Li Tianlan, would also be doomed eternally. This was Wang Tianzong's gamble. He made Li Tianlan reach the sky in a single bound. If Li Tianlan successfully controlled the Snowdance core and destroyed the conspiracy of the Wang family of Beihai, the Li family would rise completely. Li Tianlan, who grew up, would bring the Li family to the peak again and make the Dongqing clan complete further transformation. The future of the Wang family of Beihai was doomed to be restless. On the contrary, if the Wang family of Beihai let the old things reincarnate again and staged a case of treason, the Snowdance core would be wiped out, and the Dongqing clan, which was implicated, could only go to the end. This was a gamble set by Wang Tianzong, and his chips were his own strength and the almost endless resources and connections of the Wang family of Beihai. It was difficult for the Dongqing clan to win, so he didn't want to sit at this gambling table. But Wang Tianzong now involved the Southeast Group and the Special Warfare Group, and even Chen Fangqing of the Prince Group expressed his support. It was obvious that he wanted to use the general trend to promote Dongqing Wudi. 24 hours ago, in the Sky Academy, Dongqing Wudi used the general trend to make Gu Xingyun and Wang Tianzong not dare to act rashly. 24 hours later, in the building of the army headquarters, Wang Tianzong also used the general trend to suppress Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi laughed at himself a little. Was this retribution? He glanced at Li Tianlan again. Li Tianlan was still calm. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and finally opened the scar of the Li family. The situation in Eastern Europe is chaotic, and the garrison has suffered heavy losses. We are angry, but the current situation may be an opportunity for us to expand our influence in Eastern Europe. I think, under such circumstances, in order to be safe, Zhongzhou State should send a trustworthy person to take charge. His voice was hoarse and low, but like a thunder, it rolled through the conference room. Li Tianlan's face changed, but he did not speak. Everyone was looking at Dongqing Wudi. Minister Dongqing, do you mean that His Highness Li Tianlan is not trustworthy? Yi Dongqing laughed. Dongqing Wudi was expressionless. At this point, there was no room for evasion. More than 20 years ago, the treason of His Highness Li Guangtu caused to Zhongzhou State has not been fully compensated. Everyone knows Tianlan's origin. He has not been tested enough. The army headquarters. I can't believe his loyalty to Zhongzhou State. He's not suitable. This bloody scar was completely torn apart by Dongqing Wudi. Everyone looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's face was a little angry, a little ashamed, and a little helpless. Countless emotions flashed in his eyes. But his face was still as calm as a rock. He sat there quietly, looking a little cold. He minded Dongqing Wudi's words very much, but he couldn't say that he blamed him. Today's meeting was extremely strange from the beginning. Li Tianlan had vaguely realized the problem. Dongqing Wudi would rather open the scar of the Li family to prevent him from serving as the marshal of the Snowdance Corps, which was enough to prove the cruelty and danger behind Wang Tianzong's nomination this time. Li Tianlan does come from the Li family. But the Li family has not only Li Guangtu but also Senior Li. Senior Li is the founder of Zhongzhou State. His achievements are world-shaking and unyielding. Li Tianlan grew up with Senior Li. What does it have to do with Li Tianlan? I think he is trustworthy. Wang Tianzong's tone was flat and cold. Now he praised Li Honghe, which was exactly the same as Dongqing Wudi's feeling when he talked about Li Guangtu's treason. It was very uncomfortable. This kind of feeling was not disgusting, but he really didn't like it and didn't want to say it. Since the comrades are so divided, I think it's better. President Li Huaqing, sitting in the main seat, finally opened his mouth. However, before he finished speaking, he had been interrupted by Commander Wang Qinzhong on the screen. Sorry, Mr. President, the situation in Eastern Europe is very chaotic. On behalf of the 150,000 troops of the Arctic Ocean Command, I ask the decision-making committee to make a decision as soon as possible. We can't afford it. President Li Huaqing frowned. "President, why don't we vote?" Chen Fangqing said calmly. "Vote." This was a very feasible method. In the high-level meeting, if there was a serious disagreement on a topic, it would either be postponed or voted. The minority followed the majority. But this was not the council of the provincial government or the municipal government. This was a high-level meeting. High-level meetings that rarely took votes were the most test of political wisdom. What was important here was the game, balance, compromise, and decisiveness between advance and retreat. Voting was tantamount to intensifying contradictions. The intensification of contradictions at the high level was enough to have an impact on the entire Zhongzhou state. Therefore, the decision-making committee rarely voted. But in the current situation, Eastern Europe was full of dangers and opportunities. Some things really couldn't wait. Li Huaqing glanced at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi's face had turned livid. But under the general trend, if Wang Tianzong wanted to pass the nomination regardless of everything, Dongqing Wudi was unprepared, and it was really difficult to stop him. Li Huaqing took a deep look at Dongqing Wudi and then said. His tone was flat. Flat without temperature. In fact, without looking at the votes, Li Huaqing already knew the result. The academics were indeed cooperating with the giant group. But such cooperation was not really a complete common advance and retreat. The alliance of the two groups was for the foreseeable future. Under such sensitive issues, even if the academics supported the giant group, it could not be a complete support. Li Huaqing could not let the academics offend the Special Warfare Group, the Southeast Group, the Prince Group, and the North Group at one time. Especially when the result was difficult to change. After all, he could not sit in this position forever. He was an ally of the giant group, but he was also the leader of the academics. He must consider the academics. The academics now had two giants in the council. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State. Hua Xingyang, the second Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing glanced at Hua Xingyang. Prime Minister Hua nodded. Silently, the two had a tacit understanding. Li Huaqing would vote for Dongqing Wudi. But Hua Xingyang had to abstain. This was the support of the academics. It was heavy, but it could not change anything. On the morning of August 1st, the decision-making committee of Zhongzhou State held an August high-level meeting in the building of the army headquarters. Except for some of the parties involved, no one knew what was discussed in the 5-hour meeting. Only a few secretaries of the army headquarters, who were ordered to keep their mouths shut, knew when they cleaned up the conference room after the meeting that Minister Dongqing Wudi lost his temper after the meeting. He smashed the teacup he used and kicked the expensive and huge conference table in the conference room. The pieces of the whole table were blocked by Dijiang when they almost hit Wang Tianzong's face. Dongqing Wudi, who was unscrupulous in front of all the high-level officials in his own territory, walked out of the conference room with a livid face. It was not until the afternoon that the feudal officials at the provincial government level of Zhongzhou State vaguely knew the content of the meeting. On the afternoon of August 1st, two people, headed by Lieutenant General Jiang Hongwei of the Beihai Corps and Deputy Secretary General by Qin Zhao of the Army Headquarters, were awarded the rank of general. 7 people were awarded the rank of Lieutenant General. 7 people were awarded the rank of Major General. Lieutenant General Jiang Hongwei of the Beihai Corps was awarded the rank of Marshal. At the same time, the Army Headquarters announced the day's personnel adjustment. The decision-making committee agreed that Dongqing Wudi, the Marshal of Zhongzhou State and the Standing Minister of the Army Headquarters, would resign as the Commander of the Border Control Corps. The Army Headquarters appointed Lieutenant General Jiang Hongwei of the Beihai Corps as the Commander of the Border Control Corps. Lieutenant General Wang Qianzhong, the Commander of the Arctic Ocean Command, was transferred to the Northeast Black Dragon Army as the Commander. Lieutenant General Cheng Huaining, the former commander of the Black Dragon Army, was appointed as the commander of the Arctic Ocean Command. All this was just the beginning of the transaction between the Southeast Group and the Giant Group. And the transaction involving the change of multiple real power positions at this level was doomed to be completed in one day. Dijiang became the youngest military marshal in Zhongzhou State. If there was no accident, he would also become the youngest member of the decision-making committee in Zhongzhou State this autumn. Just when everyone was talking about how long it would take for the Border Control Corps to become the second Beihai Corps in the hands of Dijiang. In the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, there was also the youngest special warfare system Marshal. After voting, Zhongzhou State decided to restart the Snowdance Corps. The restarted Snowdance Corps was expected to have 20,000 people. Zhongzhou State would respect the will of the new marshal of the Snowdance Corps to the greatest extent and form the corps lineup. Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou State nominated Li Tianlan as the new marshal of the Snowdance Corps. The result of the vote of the council was 5 in favor, 3 against, and 1 abstained. Gu Xingyun, the state-protecting war god of Zhongzhou State, clearly expressed his approval. As a result of the vote of all the high-level officials, the support votes were still greater than the opposition votes. Li Tianlan was officially appointed as the commander of the Snowdance Corps. After the formal formation of the Snowdance Corps, he would go to Eastern Europe on behalf of Zhongzhou State and become a pivotal force in the chaos of Eastern Europe. A meteoric rise. The general trend never cared about one person's opinion, whether he was willing or not. During the time of a meeting, Li Tianlan was directly pushed to a position infinitely close to the peak of power. A meeting that originally had little to do with him became the protagonist invisibly. Eastern Europe would be the journey of him and the Snowdance Corps. This was an extremely clear but extremely difficult path. There was chaos ahead. There was an abyss behind. Chapter 392. 10,000-word super chapter. Brothers, can you exchange for a few monthly votes? As a member of Parliament of Zhongzhou State, Bai Zhanfang, known as the governor of Yuzhou, was as simple as an old farmer, but he was very particular about his life. Bai Zhanfang did not choose Dragon Lake Park, which Zhongzhou State allocated to the members of parliament, but set up the Bai family in Mount Qing. Mount Qing was one of the famous tourist attractions in Yuzhou. Bai Zhanfang chose the area with the best scenery in Mount Qing and built a manor covering an area of about 200 acres among the green mountains and clear water. The manor did not cover a large area, but the 2-kilometer area around the manor was all turned into a restricted area. There were armed police patrolling on weekdays, and it looked like a wealthy family that no strangers were allowed to enter. There was a pavilion on the edge of the Bai family's manor. It was a historical site, built near the water, and looked old. This place was unique. Sitting here, the most beautiful scenery of the whole Mount Qing came into view. Every inch of land in sight was a grand view. Li Tianlan sat in the pavilion and drank tea. Bai Zhanfang, with a blank expression, and Dongqing Wudi, whose face was still gloomy, also sat in the pavilion. The three of them sat opposite each other in silence. The sky in Yuzhou became gloomy in the afternoon. The wind blew in Mount Qing, and it drizzled. The rain fell on the natural lake outside the pavilion and on the lush green mountains. The mountains and rivers were foggy, and everything was hazy. The wind shuttled through the soft drizzle and blew the weeping willows by the lake. Li Tianlan's gaze followed the fluttering weeping willows into the distance. The hazy green mountains behind him were majestic. The hazy lake in front of him was vast. Li Tianlan looked at the extremely beautiful landscape in silence, thinking about his own worries. Dongqing Wudi did not participate in Bai Qingzhao's conferring ceremony. He and Li Tianlan followed Bai Zhanfang to the Bai family's manor. After making a phone call, they did not talk much. Bai Zhanfang quietly made tea and drank it, looking indifferent, but his eyes occasionally observed Dongqing Wudi and Li Tianlan. He observed their silence. The silence was a little awkward. Bai Zhanfang smiled and winked at Dongqing Wudi. Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi spoke slowly. He looked at the misty lake. Do you blame me? His tone was steady, but it sounded a little stiff. Li Tianlan withdrew his gaze, smiled, and shook his head. No. He paused for a moment before continuing, Truth. I'm not that narrow-minded. I was definitely uncomfortable with what the marshal said at the meeting. But it's not your fault. Some things, whether you say it or not, are real. I can understand Marshall's good intentions, but it's a pity. His gaze was a little unfocused. He wanted to say that it was a pity that he still ended up as a marshal. But no matter how he thought about it, This sentence felt awkward. He simply shut his mouth. In the conference room, when Dongqing Wudi mentioned the treason case more than 20 years ago, Li Tianlan already understood Dongqing Wudi's concerns. He seemed to be exposing Madame Li's scars, but on that occasion, wasn't it another kind of reminder? Li Tianlan also expressed in the meeting that he was not experienced enough to be the marshal of the Special Warfare Battalion. However, it was obvious that even though his status had become important, he still did not have the qualifications to influence the decisions of the higher-ups. Zhongzhou State's appointment to him was irresistible. Although there were many dissenting votes at the high-level meeting, since the resolution had been passed, it could be regarded as the collective decision of the entire high level of Zhongzhou State. He had to take office, and no one could interfere. Don't think too much. Bai Zhanfang suddenly said, "It's not necessarily a bad thing." Li Tianlan was speechless. Dongqing Wudi also smiled bitterly. Li Tianlan becoming the commander of the Snowdance Corps did have a little chance of turning into a good thing. But in essence, it was something that none of them wanted to happen. They had won the final maneuver of the two academies. The East Emperor Palace was developing in Zhongzhou State as a free force. Their achievements and potential were recognized. Not only the two academies, but also the Zhongzhou State government would give them support. This was the rule and righteousness. No matter how Gu Xingyun suppressed the East Emperor Palace, the resources that should be given could not be less. At that time, the East Emperor Palace would take root in Tiannan, the place where the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State could influence but not cover. It could be said to be really broad. In any case, it was much better than Li Tianlan serving as the commander of the Snowdance Corps. Although in theory, Li Tianlan could still go to Tiannan after the chaos in Eastern Europe ended, theory was only theory. Not to mention how long the chaos in Snow Country would last. Even if it was not long, the Wang family of Beihai would not let Li Tianlan come back from Eastern Europe easily. More than 20 years ago, the Li family failed to bear the groundless crime of treason at its peak. Today, more than 20 years later, if history repeated itself, not only would Li Tianlan die, but also the giant group would be doomed eternally. It was possible for Li Tianlan to turn a bad thing into a good thing. But at the very least, he had to play a decisive role in the chaos in Eastern Europe. At the same time, he had to smash the conspiracies of the Southeast Group, the Special Warfare Group, and the Prince Group. He even had to block Wang Tianzong's killing intent, completely control the Snowdance Corps, and lead the Snowdance Corps to Tiannan. This was the best result, as good as a dream, but how could it be possible? Dongqing Wudi's breath was a little disordered. At today's high-level meeting, 5 of the 9 directors voted in favor. The 5 directors plus Gu Xingyun each represented 4 large groups. There was no doubt that the forces who voted in favor were the most likely to stir up trouble for Li Tianlan in the Snowdance Corps. The giant group did its best, but what it got was extremely limited. First of all, it transferred Wang Qianzhong to the Border Control Corps and appointed Cheng Huaining, the general of the giant group, as the commander of the Arctic Ocean Command. It could be regarded as taking the supreme power of the Eastern European garrison for Li Tianlan in advance. Secondly, the list of the Snowdance Corps would fully respect Li Tianlan's will. But full respect did not mean full agreement. In a special warfare corps composed of real elites, the major forces would definitely put their pawns in it. This was the case in Zhongzhou State and even in the world. From the highest level to various institutions, provinces, cities. Where there were people, there would be jianghu. Where there was jianghu, there would be games. Where there was games, there would be pawns. The Snowdance Corps was undoubtedly the latest chessboard in the eyes of the major forces. Li Tianlan was not only a pawn, but also a player who controlled the entire chessboard. With such a change in identity, a slight oversight might allow the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City to seize the opportunity to beat Li Tianlan into the abyss. Wudi. Bai Zhanfang glanced at Dongqing Wudi, who was breathing heavily, and said quietly, "Your mind is in a mess." Dongqing Wudi's heart froze. He picked up the teacup and took a sip, remaining silent. Now that it has happened, we have no room for objection. No matter how distressed we are, it doesn't help. The key is to find a way to deal with it. No matter how big or small a crisis is, it is a crisis. opportunity and danger coexist. We can't resist the danger. Can't we make preparations in advance? Bai Zhanfang said slowly and clearly. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath, bowed to Bai Zhanfang and whispered, "I see, Dad." Bai Zhanfang said no more. In terms of position in Zhongzhou state, Dongqing Wudi's position was already above Bai Zhanfang's. But in the manner of the Bai family, no matter how powerful Dongqing Wudi was, he was still Bai Zhanfang's son-in-law. The key is the list. Bai Zhanfang said. Dongqing Wudi nodded and suddenly said, "Tun, what's your plan?" "I don't know," Li Tianlan said quietly. His tone was just as steady and just as stiff. He was now one of the highnesses of Zhongzhou state and the youngest marshal in the special warfare system. It could be said that he was in a high position. But such a change was too abrupt. In one day, what should have happened and what shouldn't have happened had happened. Power, status, honor, and responsibility pressed on him before he could react. Under such a heavy burden, he didn't even have time to breathe before he had to lead the Snowdance Corps to Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan would not flinch. But now he didn't know how to move forward. He had yet to adapt to his current height, but he was already about to charge forward with large strides. The feeling of suddenly losing direction was not one of nervousness or fear, but of confusion. Only confusion. Dongqing Wudi and Bai Zhanfang looked at each other and didn't speak to each other. Some changes would happen sooner or later. Now no one doubted Li Tianlan's martial arts and potential, but his ability to deal with problems in a chaotic situation was still a question mark. Sometimes, this was even more important than martial arts. Without this ability, no matter how strong he was in martial arts, he was just a martial artist, not a qualified leader. The two of them were not worried about Li Tianlan's ability. Li Honghe, the former god of war, had spent many years to cultivate his successor. In any case, he could not be a pure boor. In the final analysis, Li Tianlan's biggest problem was to adapt and integrate into the high-level circle. The list is based on my will, but I can't have the final say, can I? Li Tianlan asked softly after a long silence. Most of them will be based on your will. But in the army's high level, there are at least 2 positions that we can't take. This is the minimum rule. Dongqing Wudi said, 1 is the vice marshal of the army, your main assistant. If there is no accident, this position will be transferred from the Beihai Corps. The Wang family of Beihai is very powerful in Eastern Europe. It's reasonable to give them the position of vice marshal. The other is the army supervisor, which must be appointed by Kunlun City. He is responsible for monitoring the Snowdance Corps and has the power to report the movements of the Corps to the decision-making committee at any time. His voice was a little low, with suppressed anger and helplessness. A vice marshal and a supervisor were the most sensitive positions. Around these 2 positions, 2 sets of teams belonging to Beihai and Kunlun were bound to emerge. These 2 sets of teams might not be able to control the overall situation, but they were enough to restrain some of Li Tianlan's actions, and even completely overthrow Li Tianlan's position as the commander-in-chief if they seized the opportunity. Eastern Europe has changed dramatically, and only the Snowdance Corps is going to Eastern Europe? What do Sword Emperor and Hidden God say? Li Tianlan continued to ask. Of course, outside the Snowdance Corps. Beihai province is relatively independent. Wang Tianzong went to Eastern Europe for the interests of Beihai province. Of course, if conditions permit, the Snowdance Corps can ask for his cooperation. Sai City stands aloof from the world and has always been a free force. Situ Tsangyue is also independent of the Snowdance Corps, Dongqing Wudi said. What he said was very clear. The Snowdance Corps gathered the special warfare elites of Zhongzhou state, but it could not limit the Invincible Realm experts. In such a chaotic situation, the Invincible Realm experts had considerable freedom. Li Tianlan nodded. In this case, how about drawing 20,000 people from the 40,000 troops of the Sky Academy into the Snowdance Corps? As for Li Tianlan's tone suddenly paused. There was a flash of hesitation in his eyes, and he looked at Dongqing Wudi. It was not until this moment that he suddenly remembered that he had become the commander of the Snowdance Corps, which was equivalent to Wang Tianzong forcing the Dongqing clan to sit on the gambling table. But Dongqing Wudi still had his choice. He could choose to fully support himself and gamble with Wang Tianzong. But if it was safe, in the unknown time in the future, the Dongqing clan could also try to disassociate themselves from him. Maybe they would not completely disassociate themselves, and maybe they would still pay a huge bargaining chip and the price of generations. But it was much better than the result after he failed. If the Dongqing clan had the intention to retreat, Li Tianlan could understand. If he wanted the elites of the Border Control Corps in the Sky Academy at this time, it would definitely embarrass Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi clearly saw the hesitation in Li Tianlan's eyes. No problem, he said without hesitation. I will screen the 40,000 people as soon as possible and form the strongest framework of 20,000 people. I can give Li Zhonghu and the other 3 to you. Tianlan, as for each of the hundreds of thousands of troops in the Border Control Corps, I dare not say that they are absolutely loyal, but you can rest assured about each of these 40,000 people. If you can trust me, you can trust them. In Li Tianlan's heart, the Dongqing clan might have a choice. But in Dongqing Wudi's heart, since he had come to this point, he would never turn back. He could not give up Li Tianlan, absolutely not. Thank you, Marshal. Li Tianlan bowed to Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi gave a carefree smile. In the hazy drizzle, his smile was cool and a little bitter. In addition, I will transfer some people from Sai City to the Snowdance Corps. Li Tianlan said softly. He had only been to Sai City once. But after all, he was the young governor of Sai City and had enough power to use the resources of Sai City. Power might not be equal to qualification. But now was not the time to talk about this. He could not give up the position of the commander of the Border Control Corps, so he could only increase the strength around him as much as possible. He was afraid of death, afraid of failure, afraid that he would be crushed like an ant by the general trends set off by the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, and even more afraid of the consequences that the Li family, the giant group, and even Sai City would face after his death. Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath and said, "Can Jade Pool give me some support?" "I'll talk to Junior Sisterhead." Dongqing Wudi said in a calm tone, "I've already asked someone to sort out the information. It's all the power of our giant group in the special warfare system. The information will be sent to you in the evening. They can all be trusted. You can choose some and let them join your Snowdance Corps." Li Tianlan nodded. He didn't have much time. The decision-making committee gave him 3 days to build the Snowdance Corps, and he had to arrive in Eastern Europe within 5 days. There was also time to contact the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. It was quite urgent. Li Tianlan took a sip of tea in silence. Just as he was about to continue, his cell phone suddenly rang. The caller ID was an extremely strange number, and it belonged to Yuzhou. Li Tianlan frowned, picked up the phone and said hello. "Your Highness Li Tianlan?" On the phone, an old voice sounded. It was very strange, and there was no extra emotion in the unhurried tone. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and said faintly, "It's me. Your Highness, I asked to talk to you alone. There's a very important thing. Maybe it's about the boss's life and death." The old voice continued to ring, and it was calm. "Boss?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. "Qin Wei Bai." Li Tianlan suddenly fell silent. After a long time, he said calmly, "Who are you?" "The 13th Supermaster of Samsara Palace." The old man on the phone chuckled. "My codename is Tianji. Your Highness, we met more than 3 years ago at the garden party." "More than 3 years ago. The garden party." Listening to the old voice, Li Tianlan suddenly opened his eyes wide. He suddenly felt ridiculous. The 13th Supermaster of Samsara Palace. "Tianji? I'm on Mount Green," Li Tianlan said. "The manor of the Bai family?" "The manor of the Bai family." On the phone, Tianji was silent for a while and whispered, "I'll wait for you at the top of Mount Green, Your Highness." Li Tianlan calmly hung up the phone and looked at the scenery outside the pavilion. He was silent for a long time. "I'm going to the mountain." He pointed to Mount Green outside the pavilion and looked at Dongqing Wudi and Bai Zhanfeng. The top of Mount Green was naturally the highest place on Mount Green. How powerful was Dongqing Wudi? Even if he didn't have to listen to the phone call, he could vaguely hear something. The word "simra" made his eyes light up slightly. He nodded and said, "Go ahead. Be careful." Li Tianlan nodded, stood up, and left the pavilion. It was right to be careful. But with his current strength, he didn't have to be too cautious. And when the Snowdance Corps was about to set off, neither the Wang family of Beihai nor Kunlun City could plot against him at this time. Dongqing Wudi and Bai Zhanfang looked back at Li Tianlan's back at the same time. The back was thin, but it was extremely straight and sharp as a sword. There was undisguised appreciation in Bai Zhanfang's eyes. Dongqing Wudi was still silent. "Do you feel bad?" Bai Zhanfang suddenly asked. Dongqing Wudi said nothing and turned his head to drink tea in silence. The tea was getting cold, and the rain was still drizzling. The water in the teapot boiled again, and the tea leaves swirled in the boiling water. When Bai Zhanfang was about to give up the question, Dongqing Wudi raised his head again. He looked into the distance, at the hazy landscape and dense fog that Li Tianlan had just seen. "I don't feel bad." His tone was calm. "You're a great general." Bai Zhanfang stood up and picked up the extremely expensive teapot. He poured the boiling water into the pot under the pavilion. The boiling water blended with green lake, bringing a white splash and heat. "I'm old." Bai Zhanfang suddenly said, "I feel bad." Without waiting for Dongqing Wudi's answer, he walked out of the pavilion directly. "Go about your business. Come back for dinner in the evening." He walked out of the pavilion and went ashore along the antique bridge. Dongqing Wudi still sat where he was, motionless. Bai Zhanfang suddenly turned around, looked at his son-in-law's back, and asked, "Who was on the phone with Tianlan just now?" "It seems to be the supermaster of samsara." Dongqing Wudi replied. "So you should calm down." Bai Zhanfang said, "Eastern Europe is a place where it's hard for us to get involved. But do you think it's also hard for Boss Qin to get involved?" According to the intelligence, Samsara Palace was one of the first forces to enter Snow Country. The headquarters of Samsara Palace was destroyed and suffered heavy losses, but in Eastern Europe, they may have enough power. You and Wang Tianzong are sitting at the gambling table, and Samsara Palace is one of your chips. Wang Tianzong also knows Samsara Palace, but he won't know what it means, and neither do we. Unknown means all possibilities. I understand. Dongqing Wudi nodded. He turned his back to Bai Zhanfang, so no one could see his expression. "But how can I calm down?" "If you really can't calm down, you might as well ask about the chips in your hand." Bai Zhanfang turned and left. He was bathed in the drizzle, carrying the teapot. In the gloomy weather, his figure looked a little stooped. Dongqing Wudi held the teacup in one hand and picked up his mobile phone with the other. The chips that needed to be asked were naturally chips that he didn't know what they meant. Dongqing Wudi found Qin Weibai's phone number and seemed to be hesitating whether to dial. Bai Zhanfang ignored the psychological activities of his high-ranking son-in-law. His figure stepped over the small bridge by the lake and strolled on the flat path at the foot of the mountain. The guard who had been guarding here opened an umbrella. Bai Zhanfang waved his hand, bathed in the cool drizzle of midsummer, crossed the entire manor, and returned to the main villa in the manor. He didn't tell the guard anything. The guard stood in front of the door and saluted, then returned to his guard duty with the umbrella. Bai Zhanfang pushed the door open and walked into the villa alone. The lights were on in the villa. Under the soft light, two old men who shouldn't have been here were sitting in the living room playing chess. Zhongzhou State Chess. The game of chess had entered an endgame. But the two pawns on the chessboard had crossed the river. For the pawns, such an endgame was actually the real beginning. Green Mountain was not high, but it was huge. However, the top of Green Mountain was not flat. The steep slope of the top reduced the area of the top, so it was not difficult to find people. The drizzle was like silk. The crowds of tourists who came to Green Mountain were much quieter. Li Tianlan climbed to the top of the mountain along the steep mountain road and saw an old Daoist in a Taoist robe and holding a horsetail whisk at a glance. The Taoist's beard and hair were all white. He didn't pretend to be profound and turned his back to him. Instead, he faced him with a soft smile. Even on weekdays, there were not many tourists at the top of Green Mountain. The mountain road was steep and exquisite. All tourists had better choices if they wanted to overlook it. At this time, it was drizzling, and the top of the mountain was even more deserted. Only the old Daoist and Li Tianlan were left. The metaphysics grandmaster of Zhongzhou State. Daoist Xianxia. Li Tianlan thought it was him, but he still felt a little ridiculous. Qin Weibai was Great Master Wu Wei's adopted daughter. Xianxia was Qin Weibai's subordinate. The two metaphysics grandmasters of Zhongzhou State were by Qin Weibai's side. Vaguely, there was a feeling of destiny. Li Tianlan's mind was a little confused, but his footsteps didn't stop. Daoist is looking for me? He walked up to Xianxia and asked. Your Highness, I'm Tianji. Xianxia bowed with a smile, respectful but not obsequious. Li Tianlan stared at Xianxia intently. Have you always been a member of Samsara Palace? His tone was a little curious. Xianxia, Supermaster of Samsara, Tianji. This identity change happened without warning, and Li Tianlan was still a little surprised until now. I used to belong to Kunlun City. After your Highness returned to Huading, I joined Samsara Palace. As for now, on the surface, I belong to the Wang family of Beihai. Xianxia said with a sincere smile. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly. Xianxia used to belong to Kunlun City. But according to all the information he got, Xianxia belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. He had a high status on Mount Dibing, similar to a visiting minister. But such a person actually belonged to Kunlun City? If this sentence was true, how much conspiracy and viciousness did it represent? Kunlun City? Kunlun City? Li Tianlan's heart was full of ups and downs. Since he entered the secular world, he didn't think much of Kunlun City in his impression. It seemed that everyone in Zhongzhou State was the same. Even if there was a state-protecting war god of Zhongzhou State in Kunlun City. But all the light in the dark world of Zhongzhou State seemed to gather on the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. No one would ignore the power of Kunlun City and the Special Warfare Group, but there was an instinctive contempt in their bones. Li Tianlan didn't notice this problem before. Until he saw Xianxia, he realized that Kunlun City, the center of the Special Warfare System of Zhongzhou State, still hid too many conspiracies that he couldn't see. Can I believe you? Li Tianlan looked at Xianxia and asked. Now you can. Xianxia said with a smile, you can verify it with either saint or military counselor at any time. I can verify it with Little Bai directly. Li Tianlan took out his mobile phone and looked at Xianxia with no expression. Xianxia frowned slightly. His eyebrows were very white and long. When they were frowned, there was no power, but only a kind of unfathomable sorrow. Your Highness, you don't have to doubt my identity. But I don't want the boss to know that we met today. You can distrust me, but you should trust military counselor and saint. Why? Li Tianlan looked at Xianxia quietly. She's my woman and your boss. Why can't she know? This is about the boss's life and death. Xianxuanzi's tone was calm. Li Tianlan squinted at Xianxuanzi. Qin Weibai's life and death. Xianxuanzi heard it once on the phone. But at this time, Lin Fengting was beside Qin Weibai. Who could kill her? Who dared to kill her? Who wants to kill her? Li Tianlan asked. Xianxuanzi hesitated. Your Highness, do you believe in destiny? Everything seemed to be repeating again, to the garden party more than 3 years ago, when he and Xianxuanzi met for the first time. Believe in destiny? Li Tianlan squinted. Go on. It's hard to defy destiny. Xianxuanzi said softly, Your Highness, according to your original destiny, you will die before you are 30 years old. There is no possibility of survival. But when Wu Wei was alive, the boss begged Wu Wei to break your inherent destiny and force your destiny to return to chaos. Li Tianlan didn't understand. He believed in destiny and metaphysics. But he really didn't understand it. Break my destiny? Li Tianlan repeated the words. It's broken. It can also be said to be replaced. Everyone in the world has destiny and will have a trajectory. Almost no one's destiny can't be completely followed and speculated, but almost doesn't mean absolutely none. More than 3 years ago, in Mount Qingyun in Lin, the boss replaced your destiny with her own. Xianxuanzi looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. Your destiny now can't be speculated, but the boss's destiny has been doomed. In this Eastern European chaos, she is facing the tribulation for you. If you don't take action, she will definitely die. Li Tianlan's body suddenly tightened. His eyes were completely focused, and he stared at Xianxia. Facing the tribulation for me? Yes. Xianxia nodded and said briefly, instead of informing the boss, it's better for us to deal with things secretly. Li Tianlan was not flustered or confused. His mind became extremely calm in an instant. What should I do? I will link your life providences together, and say something I can understand. Li Tianlan directly interrupted Xianxia, and his eyes were extremely dangerous. I want her alive. Xianxia thought for a while, then slowly said, Your Highness, you have the dragon vein, and the dragon vein is the strongest vitality. I need 1/3 of your dragon vein. I wonder if your Highness is willing to. Yes. Li Tianlan answered without hesitation, but you have to say something more realistic. The dragon vein and vitality are illusory. How can I give it to you? If I remember correctly, you should have a Buddha bead that the boss gave you. Xianxia said. The dragon vein and vitality were illusory, but the Buddha bead was real. Li Tianlan froze for a moment and took out the Buddha bead hanging around his neck. When Qin Weibai gave him the Buddha bead, she only said that it was a mascot. Li Tianlan didn't care and just hung it around his neck. This bead is called Mortal Fate. It's something that Great Master Wei left to the boss, but the boss always thought that this bead was called Death Substitute, so she gave it to you and then went to Snow Country. Xianxia took the Buddha bead and said calmly. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved, but he couldn't say anything for a while. He was moved and angry in his heart. His feelings were complicated. What should I do? His voice was low. Mortal fate can carry vitality. As long as the mortal fate is not broken, the vitality will not die. Xianxia picked up the Buddha bead with the horsetail whisk in his hand. He reached into his Taoist robe with the other hand and took out a delicate silver bottle. He didn't mention the death of Monk Rui, because it was meaningless. The real death substitute bead is in the silver bottle. Xianxia gently crushed the mortal fate in his hand. There was no power, no sword energy, and no fluctuation in space. The Buddha bead turned into the finest powder in Xianxuanzi's hand. The powder was straight like a column in the cold wind on the mountain top, and it didn't scatter at all. All of it fell into the silver bottle. I need a drop of blood from your highness. Xianxuanzi's voice became calmer. Li Tianlan cut his finger without hesitation. He knew the Buddha bead on him. So Li Tianlan no longer doubted Xianxuanzi's identity, because no one except Qin Weibai seemed to know that he had this Buddha bead. The red blood dripped into the silver bottle. A white mist suddenly rose from the top of Green Mountain. The white mist was misty and rose into the sky, like clouds under the sky, condensed and pure. Xianxuanzi put away the silver bottle. He seemed to relax and said softly, Thank you, your highness. That's it? Li Tianlan was a little surprised. That's all I can do. Xianxuanzi's answer was meaningful. What's in the silver bottle? Li Tianlan asked. Now it has become a seed. Xianxuanzi replied, I will sprinkle them in Snow Country. When the flower blooms, it will be the time when you and the boss merge into one. Li Tianlan said, Oh, and suddenly said, When the flower blooms? Xianxuanzi hesitated and said calmly, When the trial comes. Dongqing Wudi finally dialed Qin Weibai's phone. Minister? The phone was quickly connected. Qin Weibai's cold and clear voice sounded on the phone. Dongqing Wudi looked at his watch and calculated the time in Snow Country. He said apologetically, Sorry, Boss Qin, did I disturb your rest? It's okay. Qin Weibai smiled and said, I just had breakfast. Minister, what's the matter? Dongqing Wudi hesitated, feeling a little ashamed and helpless. He said in a deep voice, There's a change in Zhongzhou state. About the snow dance corps? Qin Weibai asked straightforwardly. Dongqing Wudi froze for a moment. All the emotions in his heart kept changing and finally turned into surprise. The high-level meeting of Xianxia State ended only a few hours later. The conferring ceremony was not over yet. The meeting documents delivered to the provincial government level should not have been fully delivered. At this time, Qin Weibai already knew the content of the high-level meeting. When on earth did she know? Dong Xingwudi took a deep breath. At this moment he suddenly felt a little horrified. If a country couldn't even keep the content of high-level meetings confidential, then what was wrong? How did you know? Dong Xingwudi asked in a deep voice. His tone was extremely serious. It doesn't matter, Minister. Qin Weibai said calmly, what matters is the Snowdance Corps. The Snowdance Corps, Dong Xingwudi's mouth twitched. I failed to stop Wang Tianzong at the high-level meeting. He said. I know. Qin Weibai said calmly, 5 votes in favor. Minister, you've done your best. Leave the rest to me. Dong Xingwudi didn't want to investigate the source of Qin Weibai's intelligence for the time being. As she said, the Snowdance Corps was the most important thing at the moment. What do you want to do? Dong Xingwudi asked straightforwardly, Boss Qin, the matter of the Snowdance Corps will not be so simple. Wang Tianzong is not so kind to push Tianlan to a high position temporarily. What he wants most is for Tianlan to fall from a high position. Qin Weibai interrupted Dong Xingwudi. So Wang Tianzong is likely to repeat the treason case 20 years ago. There are opportunities everywhere in the chaos of Eastern Europe, and opportunities will appear at any time. When the Snowdance Corps is established, the vice-marshal and supervisor will definitely belong to the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. If these 2 positions are united, they can do a lot of things. If they frame Tianlan for treason with some specious evidence, the Li family, which will make a comeback, will disappear completely, and the Dongchen clan and even the entire giant group will be doomed eternally. Wang Tianzong will push Tianlan up a step. Once his plan succeeds, the gains will be unimaginable. At that time, the entire Southeast group may be the dominant force. With the help of a big victory, Wang Tianzong can even eliminate the internal problems of the Wang family of Beihai with lightning speed. This plan is not insidious. It can even be said to be an open conspiracy. Everything is in front of us, but we can't stop it. Minister, I understand your feelings. Dong Xingwudi didn't say a word for a long time. He always thought that Qin Weibai was very young, and maybe sometimes she couldn't see through some problems. But Qin Weibai's words almost hit the nail on the head. She completely saw through Wang Tianzong's plan. But as Qin Weibai said, this was an open conspiracy. Even if they knew what the other party was going to do, they had no way to stop it. How could they stop Wang Tianzong's plan after seeing through it? The list of the Snowdance Corps is the key. Minister, you just need to help Tianlan build a suitable Snowdance Corps for him. I'll take care of everything else. Qin Weibai's tone was decisive and calm. Your Samsara Palace doesn't seem to be in a good situation in Snow Country now. Dong Xingwudi said in a deep voice. It's really not good. After all, not everyone can completely control the dark world. Accidents will always happen. It's good that it can be solved. Qin Weibai said. How will you solve it? Boss Qin, I hope I know your plan since our cooperation has come to this point. You know my position very well. Dong Xingwudi said calmly and persistently. I didn't solve it. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and said lightly, in fact, I'm not in Snow Country now. I just arrived in the Holy Land an hour ago. It must be extraordinary to be named after the word, holy. There were also cities named after the word, holy, in Xianxia State. For example, Shenzhou City, the capital of Beihai Province at the foot of Mount Dibing. And Europe also had the Holy Land. Chapter 393. The endgame was also a deadlock. Any chess game would end in a deadlock. The turbulent situation on the chessboard seemed to be clear at the end, but there were endless variables hidden in the remaining chess pieces, subtle and obscure. Therefore, whether the chess game was fierce or peaceful, whether the chess style was fierce or patient, When it reached the endgame stage, it was the situation created by the chess players. No matter how such a situation looked to outsiders, only the chess players would know what all this meant. There were not many chess pieces on the chessboard. Most of the chariots, horses, and cannons were killed. The fortune teller of the red chess pieces was disabled. The two soldiers of the black chess pieces were still guarding. The red chess pieces still had the horse cannon. At this point in the game, it could be said to be the most fierce trump card. But the pawns of the black chess pieces crossed the boundary between Chu and Han, and their every move carried a strong sense of oppression. Bai Zhanfang sat down on the sofa and watched the game without saying a word. At this point in the endgame, the chess pieces represented no longer played a big role. The control of the game was the key to victory or defeat. The two old chess players were very patient. They thought for a long time, carefully placed the chess pieces, and maintained their composure step by step. No matter how bad the situation was, all they wanted was victory. Those chess pieces that were thrown out of the chessboard before victory, no matter how important they were not important to the victory or defeat since they had been eliminated. Bai Zhanfang watched silently. Time passed slowly. The old men at both ends of the chessboard moved more and more slowly. There were fewer and fewer chess pieces on the chessboard, and the large blank area revealed only solemnity. Draw. Bai Zhanfang, who had been watching the game, finally spoke. He didn't know the mind of the chess players, but he saw the result of the game clearly. For the disadvantaged side, a draw is victory. The old man holding the red chess pieces chuckled. The old man's hair and beard were all white, and even his face looked abnormally pale. His face was old, his eyes were dim, and he was dressed in plain cloth clothes, looking extremely haggard. But his voice and temperament were unusually calm. It was the steadiness and calmness that had been settled for many years. His every move was shining with the light of wisdom. A draw is a draw. I'm a soldier. For me, if I can't destroy everything, it's a failure. It's the same on the chessboard and outside the chessboard. A draw is equivalent to coexistence. If they are enemies, how can they coexist? It's best to kill them all. The old man holding the black chess pieces was dressed in a tang suit and had a ruddy face. Among the three of them, he was not the youngest, but he looked the most energetic and fierce. Even though he was over 70 years old, his words were still full of determination. You're just too murderous. When an ordinary person is at a disadvantage, the first thing they think about is how to survive. Once you're at a disadvantage, the first thing you think about is how to perish together with your opponent. This is the style of your family, good or bad. If you had calmed down during that game, I wouldn't have had much of a chance of winning. However, you were decisive in killing, willing to sacrifice your troops to kill to the end. That's why I forced you into a draw. The chess game is so harmless, but if it was outside the chessboard, how tragic would it be for the two families to fight to such an extent? The haggard old man sighed softly and looked at the opponent in front of him in silence. He smiled again and said, however, there are benefits to having a strong killing intent. If it weren't for this temperament, you wouldn't have been able to cultivate the god of massacre of Zhongzhou state today. However, in many matters, it was best to be more tactful. It's too unyielding. It's easy to be forced into a draw with a pawn, or even turn defeat into victory. I can't help it. Your pawn is extraordinary. The old man in the tang suit laughed and said in a knowing tone, my pawn has now crossed the river and will become your pawn. I hope he can be more radical under your influence, but it's best if he can be tactful at the critical moment. The old man said this quietly, and his face became more and more haggard. The old man in the tang suit held the chess piece and said nothing. Li Honghe, Dongqing Hongguang, a former war god of Zhongzhou state. A former minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou state. Without anyone noticing, the two had secretly appeared in Yuzhou and the Bai family manor before the high-level meeting began. Another game? Dongqing Hongguang raised his head and glanced at Li Honghe with burning eyes. Li Honghe said a lot. Dongqing Hongguang also listened to a lot of it. However, for him, it was still a little aggrieved to play a draw when he had the upper hand. Well, another game is the same. It's been more than 20 years. How many times have you won? Bai Zhanfang said angrily, not giving face to his in-law at all. He added water to the teapot and changed the tea leaves. The fragrance of tea began to drift in the living room again. I've only gone down a few times. Dongqing Hongguang looked dissatisfied. One game a year. Tianlan is 22 years old this year. How many games have you played? Which one have you won? Bai Zhanfang was not polite at all. I haven't lost either. Dongqing Hongguang seemed to be a little angry. Li Honghe smiled and waved his hand. Hongguang and I have our own strengths. I'm not as good as him in some aspects, and he is not as good as me in some aspects. That's why I chose to neutralize each other. He was telling the truth. His heart was sincere. From the year when the Li family collapsed to the present, for 22 years, Li Honghe would come here every year to play a game of chess with Dongqing Hongguang. 22 years. 22 games were draws. They were all draws. Li Honghe looked down at the chessboard, his eyes a little absent-minded. He used to be the god of war of Zhongzhou state. But even in his most glorious period he had never been too aggressive. He had been mediocre all his life. In the face of anything, his first reaction was not to seek victory, but to seek peace. Such a god of war of Zhongzhou state had naturally been brilliant, but there were not many records that could be remembered. He was seeking peace, so there were few big victories. But Zhongzhou state had never been defeated in the years when he was the state-protecting god of war. At that time, Li Honghe was very stable. Zhongzhou state was also very stable, terrifyingly stable. So until now, Li Honghe couldn't understand why he had cultivated such an aggressive son after being mediocre all his life. Stable, mediocre, and seeking peace. That was the secret of Li Honghe's success. No one would doubt the secret of his success, at least until he failed. So even if he discovered the undercurrent between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai, Li Honghe was still confident in his control. He still tried to play a game of chess between the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family. But no one gave him this opportunity. Li Guangtu didn't give it, nor did Summer Solstice. When he was still making arrangements, the whole situation had collapsed in an instant. The flood was overwhelming, and the situation was beyond redemption. The mediocre and the draw he sought seemed so hesitant in hindsight. It was at that time that he finally began to reflect on whether there was something wrong with his way of dealing with it. Looking at the whole world, he was definitely the person who was the best at playing chess. When he was at a disadvantage, he could force a draw, which Dongqing Hongguang couldn't do. When he had an advantage, Dongqing Hongguang could sweep everything away and play to his heart's content. Li Honghe asked himself that he couldn't do that. With an advantage, if he played chess, he was afraid that it would still be a draw or even a loss. The collapse of the Li family was the result of his seeking peace when he had an advantage. It was also because he realized his own shortcomings that the Li family had today's subtle relationship with the Dongqing clan, the Bai family, and even the Zhou family later. Li Honghe silently put away the chessboard. He looked at Bai Zhanfang, who was making tea but seemed a little preoccupied, and said with a smile, "Was the meeting very lively?" "More than lively." Bai Zhanfang shook his head and didn't say much. Both Dongqing Hongguang and Li Honghe could get the details of the high-level meeting as soon as possible. Dongqing Hongguang didn't need to say much. As for Li Honghe, although the Li family collapsed because of Li Guangtu, no one dared to deny Li Honghe's own achievements. Just like the last Yuzhou conference, Li Huaqing personally supported Li Honghe when he attended. Sometimes, in terms of status, Li Honghe was still a retired top giant. Therefore, for more than 20 years, the staff would sort out the contents of every high-level meeting for him to read, but Li Honghe had never expressed any opinions. Tianzong is a little anxious. Li Honghe said quietly, "If he can be more patient, maybe there will be other results." He was silent for a while, and then he laughed at himself. "Let him be. The snowdance core is good. It's very suitable for the current Tianlan. The simple snowdance core is really good." Bai Zhanfang looked at Li Honghe. "But what about Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun? Let them be." Li Honghe's tone was still calm. "I'll stay in Yuzhou for a few more days and visit some old friends." Bai Zhanfang and Li Honghe looked at each other. Li Honghe's old friends were basically big shots as long as they were still alive. And they were the retired big shots of the Southeast group. Brother, are you going to play a game with the juniors of the Wang family of Beihai in person? Dongqing Hongguang hesitated and asked. It's not my turn. Li Honghe chuckled. I'll make some preparations. But in this Eastern European chaos, the little girl surnamed Qin in Snow Country is the protagonist. Foolproof? Bai Zhanfang's eyes narrowed and he asked. How can I be absolutely sure? Li Honghe shook his head. Most likely. Dongqing Hongguang and Bai Zhanfang's bodies relaxed at the same time. Anyway, we sought change at the cost of the Li family. The plan has reached the end stage and we have no way back. If you can help us get through this difficulty, the Dongqing family can't repay such a great favor. Dongqing Hongguang was silent for a long time before he spoke in a low voice. Li Honghe shook his head, looked out of the window and whispered, helping you is also helping my Li family. The Holy Land of Europe was extremely small. But to some extent, the Holy Land was one of the most terrifying countries in the world. Because there was faith here. And faith had no borders. Faith. This was a word that represented too many special meanings. It was sacred, a destination, a worship, and inviolable. At the same time, it also meant absolute madness. This was a country built in Ciccio City, the capital of Italy. It was a country within a country and a holy land in the eyes of nearly 2 billion believers in the world. It was the first time for Qin Weibai to come to the Holy Land. She was not invited, nor was she an uninvited guest. It was more like a natural cooperation between the two sides under certain conditions. There was a holy palace in the Holy Land. Living in the Holy Palace was the master of the Holy Land and the spokesperson of God in the hearts of more than 1 billion believers. The bright sun shone in front of the Holy Palace. The ancient Holy Palace seemed to be gilded in the sun, mysterious and majestic, with a sense of solemnity precipitated by history and time. Qin Weibai stood quietly in front of the Holy Palace. The sun fell on her and fell in the Holy Palace. She and the Holy Palace both shone. In this state, Qin Weibai was like a statue of a goddess standing in front of the Holy Palace. It was beautiful, flawless, and inviolable. But it was a little empty. Lin Fengting stood beside Qin Weibai and looked at the solemn palace in front of him. His eyes were a little playful. It's my first time here, Qin Weibai said softly. Her eyes were a little dazed, as if she was holding back, but there was a kind of clear sorrow that could go deep into the bone. I have no wine. Lin Fengting joked, do you have a story? Qin Weibai shook her head with a smile and said in a quiet tone, I just remember that a long time ago, there was a man who promised his woman that he would let the owner of this holy palace personally preside over their wedding in the church opposite. Lin Fengting's eyes were quiet and gentle. That can be regarded as the highest standard of grand wedding in any era. I thought so when I was young, but I didn't do it. He didn't do it, did he? Lin Fengting smiled softly. He did, Qin Weibai said. Qin Weibai said, her eyes a little cold, but that woman gave up herself. Lin Fengting froze for a moment. Qin Weibai didn't say much. She took a deep breath and raised her hand to tidy the hair in front of her forehead. Her movements were slow, but her whole temperament was constantly changing as she raised her hand. The emptiness gradually disappeared. The sadness disappeared. The trance faded. The wind blew in the sunshine in front of the Holy Palace. The wind blew her long hair and made it fly. It seemed to be in the blink of an eye. Qin Weibai's temperament became extremely cold and sacred. That was a kind of lofty arrogance. Or arrogance. Arrogance was a sin. In front of this holy palace, which should be the most humble, Qin Weibai only had arrogance. She walked slowly into the holy palace. The clear sound of high-heeled shoes tapped on the ground of the holy palace. It was very arrogant and enchanting. A holy palace guard with a mask came over. He seemed to know why Qin Weibai and others came. He saluted and then led the way in front of them silently. In the study of the holy palace, which precipitated infinite knowledge and wisdom, an old man in a moon-white robe stood quietly in front of the door. He looked at Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting, who were led by the guard, with a subtle and gentle smile. The old man's appearance was not handsome, but his face was extremely warm. He was not tall, dressed in a white robe, had silver hair, and was neat and clean. A black cross hung in front of his chest. Contrasting with his white robe, it was a striking sight to behold. He held a heavy book in his hand and stood in front of the door, but it seemed to be standing on the horizon. It was an indescribable sense of distance. He was also an indescribable old man. Qin Weibai walked up to the old man and looked up into his eyes. Real arrogance was never exaggerated, but a kind of silence and indifference in the face of the sacred, the supreme, and the glory. The old man was still smiling. His eyes were as deep as the sea, wise and deep. Elegant, kind, gentle, and wise. Like a god. Please come in. The old man waved his hand to signal the guard to leave and looked at Qin Weibai with a smile. Qin Weibai walked forward in silence and walked into the study, which was equal to glory and wisdom. The study was simple and plain, like the holy palace, only ancient and dignified. You amaze me. I'm amazed by your beauty, your intelligence, and your decisiveness. But you also make me angry because of your arrogance. The old man still held the book and stood in front of Qin Weibai, speaking softly. His voice was gentle and quiet, but it was extremely powerful. It was not force, but a kind of indescribable heaviness and oppression, as if his words could determine everyone's fate. I don't like it here, Qin Weibai said. Her Latin was smooth and cold. She sat down in front of the old man with an indifferent expression. The old man in the white robe was not angry, but asked softly, "You have no faith?" Qin Weibai nodded. "I only believe in my man." The old man looked at Qin Weibai quietly and was silent for a long time. Qin Weibai looked at the old man, and her eyes were extremely aggressive. She sat. He stood. So Qin Weibai had to look up to him. But at this moment, she was like a queen who ruled the world, awe-inspiring and noble. Still arrogant. The old man said calmly. Qin Weibai did not speak, but quietly reached out her hand. She came here to see what she wanted to see. If the old man gave it to her, this cooperation would be a pleasant one. The old man did not hesitate. He just handed the heavy book in his hand to Qin Weibai and whispered, "The Lord is merciful. You should thank the Lord." Qin Weibai did not speak and took the book from the old man's hand. The book was extremely thick, and the cover was strange black. This was a famous book in the dark world. For hundreds of years, the content had been changing, but the cover had never changed. This was the famous heretic list in the Holy Palace. It recorded everyone who was most likely to cause great chaos in each era. To put it bluntly, it was every master. Qin Weibai opened the book and calmly said, "I'm here because of the chaos in Eastern Europe." "The Lord gave you the list because of the chaos in Eastern Europe." The old man smiled and remained calm, but his eyes were shining with wisdom. Qin Weibai raised her head and glanced at him. She turned over the names on the first page of the list. His list was on the second page. There was a letter in the first place on the second page, and there were Chinese characters. Zhongzhou Sword Emperor, Wang Tianzong. Under this name, there was all the information about Wang Tianzong that could be collected by the outside world. Qin Weibai looked down at the information. The old man looked down at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai reached out her hand. Her fingers were slender and delicate. She was as beautiful as jade and seemed to shine with jade light. Her fingers gently lifted, but she did not turn the page. Instead, she calmly but quickly tore the whole page off. The page fluttered in the air and fell into the old man's hand. "Guilty," Qin Weibai said. Her cold voice sounded in the study, but it seemed to shake the whole dark world. The old man caught the page and smiled calmly. "You should be judged." Qin Weibai continued to turn the page. One of the pages had been torn out. There was also a name on the page, but there was little information. Li Shi, the young madam of the Li family, the wife of the governor of Kunlun City. "Guilty," Qin Weibai said. The old man caught the page again and said with a smile, "You should be judged." The page continued to turn. Irene King Tong Wang Rothschild, Grand Duke. The page was torn off. Guilty. You should be judged. The patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Qiansong. Guilty. You should be judged. The page continued to turn. The page in the old man's hand was getting thicker and thicker. Every page should be judged. Once again, Qin Weibai tore off another page. The head of Knights Templars, Chaos. Guilty. The old man caught the page, glanced at it calmly and said with a smile, "The Lord will take back the glory given to him. He should be judged." Qin Weibai raised her head and looked at the old man. "Where are the Lord's swords and knights?" She asked straightforwardly. The trial was not a sermon. It was redemption and purification. But in the end, the trial was a trial. It needed swords. It needed knights and strength. The old man looked at Qin Weibai's eyes and said calmly, "I will crown Arsis." Qin Weibai looked at the old man. After a long time, she nodded. She, who had been arrogant, bowed slightly, and her noble head seemed to be lower. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Your Majesty. There were two majesties who were known all over the world. His Majesty Sword Emperor of Beihai Province in Zhongzhou State. And the other one. It was His Majesty the Pope in the Holy Land. The Holy Land was the headquarters of the Vatican. The old man picked up a scepter, put it on the top of Qin Weibai's head, and said with a smile, "The Lord appreciates the humble." Qin Weibai lowered her head. Her eyes were cold as she looked at the ground. She was never humble. She would only temporarily lower her head when she needed to do so. She needed the power of the Vatican, just as he needed the Lin clan, the Dark Knights, and all the power. Her goal had never been simply to stare at Wang Tianzong. What she stared at was the whole dark world. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, she would also judge the whole dark world. The world was guilty. They should all be judged. The Pope put away the scepter. Qin Weibai stood up and left the study in silence. The old man stared down at the page in his hand, his eyes deep. A tall guard walked into the study. "I can't accept her arrogance." The guard's eyes were angry. "Blasphemy. She put herself in a higher position than you, which is blasphemy. I refuse to cooperate with the heresy. I promised her that I would crown you." The Pope looked at the page in his hand and pointed to the door with the scepter. "Get out." The guard's face changed. He suppressed his anger and walked out of the study. He could refuse the Pope occasionally, but he could not refuse the scepter in the Pope's hand. That represented a higher power than the Pope. The Pope carefully put down the page in his hand and picked up the heretic roster. The roster was thick. So Qin Weibai did not turn to the end. The Pope turned to the second last page of the roster in silence. The information on that page was equally simple. Qin Weibai, the will of the Samsara Palace. The Pope narrowed his eyes, reached out, and gently tore the page off. He put it in the stack of pages that needed to be judged. His eyes relaxed slightly and he chuckled. Guilty, they should be judged. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.